Okay, welcome everyone to this meeting of Cheltenham Borough Council. I just wanted to welcome you all and just to announce that the meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. So welcome to any of the members of the public who may be watching. The recording of the meeting will remain online for 4 years. If you are present and making a representation to the meeting, then you are consenting to this and to the use of the recordings for broadcast and training purposes. I know we've got a few people in the gallery here, so just to welcome those of you in the gallery as well. As you should be aware, there are temporary measures that have recently come into force to increase security at the council meetings following some disruption at recent cabinet meetings. Whilst this is regrettable and the council remains committed to making decisions in open session, it is essential that meetings and council business can be carried through safely, efficiently and without disruption. In the event of a persistent disturbance, we will have to adjourn the meeting and ask those causing any disruption to leave the chamber, but I'm sure that won't become necessary. Please also be aware that CCTV and audio recording is now in operation, and the footage and recordings will be held by the council for 5 months. We should also note that there is no fire alarm test expected, so if the alarm does sound, then please make your way to the nearest fire exit immediately. And then finally, may I remind members that the speaking limit is 3 minutes in debate, particularly given the number of items we have on the agenda today. We obviously don't want to curtail the debate in any way, but please just be mindful of the fact that it is a very long agenda, and perhaps the quality of what people say isn't necessarily proportional to the length of time it takes to say it. And very finally, could I just politely remind everyone to speak clearly and into the microphone. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda today, that is apologies. So we have apologies from Councillors Chidley, Pinniger, Sankey and Flynn. Are there any other apologies to note? I think that's probably everyone. Okay, item 2 then is declarations of interest. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to say that as, along with a number of other colleagues, as a county councillor, we've got interest in the Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury Community Infrastructure Levy because of the request into that from GCC.
Okay, Councillor Horwood and then...
Sorry, there are apologies from Councillor Pinniger as well. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Clucas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My situation is in the same area as Councillor Willingham's. I'm chair of Big Local, so I will declare an interest in the CIL matter.
Okay, and Councillor Fisher.
Exactly the same as David's, personal but not prejudicial.
Okay, thank you very much, councillors. Right, so item 3 then, minutes of the last meeting. So this is the meeting held on the 16th of October. I'll just open up for any comments that members may have. And if there are none, then I'll invite you to use the electronic voting when it... Councillor Willingham.
I think I was neither listed as present nor absent, and I sent apologies. So if my apologies could be added to the minutes, please.
No, noted, thank you, councillor. Okay, if everyone could use the electronic voting, please. Thank you, members. That is carried. Okay, so item 4 then is communications by the Mayor. Just a couple of announcements by me. Members will be aware, I'm sure, to note of the passing of Honorary Freeman Air Vice Marshal Tony Mason, and a number of councillors, past and present, attended his funeral. Members will also be aware of the passing of former Mayor's Officer Paul Williams after a short illness with cancer, and his funeral is later this week. I don't know if, did you want to... Sorry, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'd just like to add my thoughts and appreciation about both gentlemen. I've obviously known Tony Mason for probably 40 years in different ways, usually connected with Remembrance Sunday or Battle of Britain Sunday. He's a fine man. For those of you who were at the funeral, it was quite moving. And the connection with Remembrance Sunday is that apparently he actually died in his care home watching Remembrance Sunday from the Cenotaph in London on Remembrance Sunday when we were in the promenade. And Paul Williams was a good servant. I think I worked here when he was appointed. I believe he used to be an RAF driver. And I think every mayor he served would have said that he was really efficient and always very helpful. So we will miss them both. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harman. Sorry, Councillor Hay.
I think I wanted to particularly remember Paul Williams over and above. I remember when Colin was mayor in 2012, he was the most efficient person you could meet. He got you to the... I don't know what the expression is, got you to the ball on time, in a really, and he would always do a recce of where you were going so that there were no surprises for you as the mayor. Not that I was mayor, but there was no surprises for those people, for the mayor arriving. So there's a very special memory for me of Paul personally. But also Tony Mason, you never failed to see his amazing stature. And he just was a really lovely man to see and talk to. So condolences to the family from us.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on Paul Williams, you know when you became mayor, it's a really something you don't ever do again or before. So you need guidance. Paul was a steadying hand on the wheel of my mayorship. He was perfect. If everybody could do their job as well as Paul, the world would be much better, and I miss him greatly.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, won't drag it out too much, but yes, again on Paul, and if I can just relay one of many stories. Paul said, I can't remember exactly what the time was, but he said, I'll pick you up tomorrow at 9 o'clock. My wife was waiting in the kitchen and she said, it's 9 o'clock and Paul's not here. And I said, well, if that clock says it's 9 o'clock and Paul's not here, that clock is wrong. I took my phone out of my pocket to check the time. As I looked at it, it clicked over to 9 o'clock. My wife was at the kitchen window and she said, here's Paul coming onto the drive now. That was the way Paul worked. Everything was spot on. So yes, he'll be very much missed.
Okay, thank you, councillors. If we could all stand just for a moment of reflection, please. Thank you, members. We move now on to item 5, which is communications by the Leader of the Council. Councillor Hay.
Nothing from me today. Thank you, Mayor.
Item 6 is to receive petitions, which I believe there are none. So we'll move on to item 7, public questions. So there's one question from Mr. Graham McIntosh. I don't know if Mr. McIntosh is... Oh, sorry. Mr. McIntosh, so we would ordinarily take the original question and answer as read, but if you have a supplementary follow-up question related to the original question, then please, please do ask that now.
Okay, my original question was answered by Councillor Horwood. And the supplementary question in reply to his is, if Cheltenham Trust are not being granted special planning privileges, then why have they been allowed to keep the COVID period greenhouse at Pittville Pump Room until September 24, with exactly the same building that was refused planning permission in October 22, then granted it in June 23, while by comparison Julian Dunkerton's COVID structures at 131 have had appeals, then modifications rejected, and they're only beside a grade 2 building, of which there are many in Cheltenham, not the iconic grade 1 listed pump room.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Councillor Horwood.
Well, I'd thank Mr. McIntosh for a supplementary question. Obviously, I don't think we can go into the minutiae of each individual planning application, how it's been treated, because that is in any case the responsibility not of the Cabinet members or of the Council corporately, but of quite specifically the Planning Committee on the advice of officers. So I might ask, if you'd like, either the planning officers responsible or the chair of the Planning Committee to write to you with a detailed answer to your question. I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask these questions, but I repeat the reassurance that I gave in my first answer, which is that all officers and councillors abide by a planning code of conduct, which is pretty strict, and which is available, as I said, on the council's website and is part of the council's constitution. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. Okay, that takes us on to item 8 then, which is members' questions. So we have 10 questions here. Again, we'll take the original question and answer as read, but if members have a supplementary, then please indicate. So question 1 is Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank very much the Cabinet member for the helpful reply. Would he also take this opportunity to recognise the efforts of some residents groups, such as the St Philip and St James one in my own ward, in helping to coordinate with UBICO the leaf clearances and helping people, warning people about their cars to be moved, an exercise they've just undertaken? And does he think it's something we should promote to other residents groups and to parish councils?
Thank you, Councillor Harman, for giving me this opportunity, indeed, to thank residents groups for precisely that action that you highlight there. I think it's really important to appreciate that we're working together with residents to get leaves and other obstructions on our pavements cleared. And indeed, there'll be many examples of that right now in recent weeks, and I'm sure continuing through the rest of the winter. So yes, I think what is done by the residents' associations and other similar groups in conjunction with the council and UBICO shows how closely we work with them and how much we value the volunteers of our town. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doby. Councillor Harman again to Councillor Hay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My facetious question might be to ask whether Councillor Jeremy Hilton is still on the Leaders' Christmas card list. But my serious question may be, and you know, in principle, something I'm actually in favour of doing what you're doing, but will it be intended that you have an open tendering process, or is it some other arrangement?
Given that I don't send Christmas cards, Councillor Harman, I think that answers itself. On the serious note, we have had lots of interest from people, and so it isn't a closed shop. Obviously, we have a duty as an authority to get the best value for any asset that we own. So we will be doing a tendering process. At the moment, we're not that far. What we've got coming forward is expressions of interest only, and it's quite exciting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hay. Question 3 is Councillor Fifield to Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the Cabinet Member for his response. I think we'll all be really sad to hear the waters still aren't drinkable. I think when I asked the same question to Councillor Wilkinson 6 months ago, he made it clear it was still uncertain what the cause of the poisoning of the water was. And I was wondering, is there any more works being done to understand what those are? And if he's got a timescale for when they might be completed?
Thank you, Councillor Fifield. The actual cause of the contamination, I think, is over speculation. It's not something that's an ongoing piece of work. It's just an ongoing question of monitoring. But I will have a conversation with the relevant property officer in case there is any more information I can shed light on it. But I don't think there is at present. It's more about understanding the actual implications at the time. But I will make some more inquiries.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Question 4 is Councillor Fifield again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the Cabinet for the response. I just want to say, I'm glad that the Cheltenham Trust are doing the works to repair the building. That's good to hear. I was wondering, for those people who booked the pump room for events, how much support were they given to find alternative venues, and have they been told when the venue will be reopened?
Again, Councillor Fifield, thank you for your question. The Council's been proactive in terms of dealing with this, as well as with the Trust. When it comes to any cancellations, they've been managed by the Trust, and alternative accommodation has been found. As and when it becomes available, again, that will obviously go out in due course with comms and so forth. There'll be I'm sure all members will be informed on when that is.
And question 5 is Councillor Fifield. Question 6 then, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the response on Idswell Drive car park. I was wondering, now that it is properly on sale, that there were any conditions or favourite type of buyers that the council had in mind for buying the property?
Thank you, Councillor Fifield. Hard to sort of prejudge what might come forward. I think my first consideration is best value. That's obviously in terms of the asset. But there are no conditions, as far as I'm aware, that we've been talking about with property officers, other than best value at this stage. Thank you.
Question 7 then is Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the response, Cabinet Member, and I do have a supplementary. And in your answer, you do refer to the successful initiative in previous years, and it was that very point that made me submit my question on the final Wednesday of November this year, because it was final Wednesday of last year's November that you actually announced the free car parking, which last year was for 4 Thursdays in December and 2 car parks. This year, the initiative wasn't announced until the 4th of December, and it's only covering 3 Thursdays and 1 car park. Please, can you explain why?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. The depths and breadths of conversations we have in how we support that community, to be fair, our business community, and some of them took longer than anticipated, and that would be the honest answer to that question.
Question 8, Councillor Nelson again.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you again to the Cabinet Member for his response. You refer to the parking strategy currently being under review, specifically with vis-à-vis the classification of inclusive for the disabled parking being not free in Regent Arcade. When will that review be concluded, please?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Now you've got me on the spot now, haven't you? I'm going to say early next year. Thank you.
Question 9 is Councillor Nelson as well.
Thank you, Mayor. Final one from me. On the EV point, thank you for your response to the Cabinet Member. How did you decide which car parks and how many EVs to put in each?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. The team have been working diligently for quite some time on EV charging points in our car parks, and they've whittled it down from, I suppose, the original whole bunch, everything in, down to what they would consider to be the most likely to be able to bring forward in terms of, you know, accessibility from the market, so i.e. the suppliers, but equally trying to make it spread across the town. And this is the first of what will hopefully be several phases of this EV rollout. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, and for the last question, Councillor Oliver.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for a detailed response. I've no supplementary question, but look forward to working with her on this in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oliver. Moving on then to the main part of the agenda, so to speak. Item 9, which is recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel regarding the members' scheme of allowances. So I'll invite Graham Russell, who is the chair of the Remuneration Panel, to introduce the report.
When you're ready, there you go.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is my pleasure to present to you the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel for Cheltenham Borough Council. We have undertaken, as we are required to do, a 4-yearly review of councillors' allowances and expenses and the whole scheme. So that includes the way it's administered, the individual elements of the scheme. We've done that review and we've made some recommendations to you based on our view about the level of current allowances to councillors, our view about the entitlement that councillors have to expenses, and where appropriate, we've, we think, corrected some anomalies and made some adjustments to reflect how Cheltenham Borough Council works. All of this is based on the evidence that we received from elected councillors who chose to come and talk to us or who we particularly wanted to speak to in terms of their roles. So it is an evidence-based report, and whilst in some respects it was not quite the report I would have liked to have presented to you, it is, however, the view of the panel that I am presenting to you. I do just want to say a thank you to those members and those officers who have supported us, particularly Bev and her team, and those councillors who chose to come to talk to us. We need evidence from the organisation as to how it works, what it is like to be a councillor in modern day local government, and without that evidence we would be in some difficulty. So I want to thank all of those members who contributed to the review. You have the report, you have our recommendations, and I'd be happy, Mr. Mayor, to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. So yes, on that, we'll start with questions. So if any members have any questions on the report, we'll start with Councillor Took. And then...
Thank you for your report. I've got 2 questions. Firstly, do you believe that using a formula originally devised in 2007 remains the most appropriate way to determine the allowance? And does it provide the flexibility to develop a scheme which reflects a modern and efficient council, looking to attract a diverse range of councillors? The second question is, obviously I acknowledge the evidence gained from the councillors, which is great, but does what 12.3 hours make sense to you, given that it's, on average for a councillor, given that it's roughly 3 hours less than councillors were doing in 2007?
Thank you for those questions. First one, do I feel a formula is appropriate, particularly one that was considered in 2007? For the basic allowance, independent remuneration panels around the region, which is the area that I have some involvement with, have some difficulty in deciding how to set a basic allowance. Is it just an uplift to an historical figure? Should it be a formula based on, to some extent, local wage rates? In this particular case, there was a formula in place. The level of allowance has been updated in the years to come. That formula was based on a relevant local employment rate, and that rate has been upgraded over the years, and the panel has taken into account the present level of that rate and used that along with the 12.3 hours that we've quoted and the percentage reduction that the government still seems to require panels to implement to the effect that a certain number of councillors' hours should be unremunerated. All of those factors together, using the formula approach, gave us the recommendation for the basic allowance. However, I personally, and I must confess this is a personal view, I do not believe that a formula is the most appropriate way to calculate the special responsibility allowances, the allowances that some councillors are entitled to over and above the basic allowance that you all are entitled to. I think, personally, we should be a bit more flexible in balancing the evidence with what the council expects from the role. That said, historically, the panel has used a different formula based on the gross basic allowance, not the percentage reduction. And that is something that perhaps we will need to look at in the future. But to answer your question directly and honestly, yes, for basic allowance. My personal view is it is not as appropriate when looking at the level and calculating the level, the differentials for special responsibility allowances. And as I say, that is something we would want to look at. With regard to the 12.3 hours, it is true that the latest national survey on members' allowances calculates the average, the national average, to be 15. We, however, the panel and I looked at the evidence that we had, and based on the evidence submitted by those who completed the questionnaire and those who came to talk to us, it did suggest mathematically that 12.3 was the current average. That said, that is one part of the formula, and using the new uplifted median wage rate that we use in our formula, that is what has produced the recommendation that we've made to you. But thank you for the question, and the points you've raised are ones that I'm sure the panel will, in the course of time, be looking at with regard to perhaps an alternative approach to making recommendations to you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a question from my own understanding. It's just, I'm trying to read it properly. In the table, which follows 4.2 recommendations, you have current and proposed. Against deputy leader, current says no current SRA, and then proposed 18,745. Is that a new payment, or is that because the deputy leader also receives a cabinet member's allowance? I'm guessing that's the answer, but I wasn't sure. Oh, sorry.
One of the anomalies we found in the scheme is that you did not have a specific provision in your special responsibility allowances for the deputy leader role, a role that you are statutorily required to have. What we like to recommend in the scheme is levels of allowance for each member role. It may be that some of those roles are undertaken by one member, in which case they would only be entitled to one of those allowances. This 18,000 is given that your deputy leader is likely to be a cabinet member. We have said that the allowance for the deputy leader should be equivalent to that of a cabinet member plus 5%, and that was that figure that we put in the scheme. So it's not in addition to a cabinet member's allowance. You still have the one member per allowance. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Matt, and I apologise if this is a silly question, but I'm going for it anyway. Chair of the Licensing Committee and Vice Chair of the Licensing Committee, a humongous increase. Can you explain why, please?
We recognise that the Licensing Committee, the Planning Committee are both delivering very important regulatory functions, and failure to deliver those effectively might render the council liable to risk. And what we felt that in what was then the existing scheme, that the differential between those two regulatory committees was too wide, and we felt it was important to recognise that the chair of those committees has a significant responsibility for managing risk at member level. That is why we uplifted, in our recommendations, we've uplifted those allowances.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell. I don't see any other questions, so we'll move on to the debate. Just to remind members, the time limit is 3 minutes. Do we have any members to speak on the debate? Sorry, Councillor Telford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to speak in favour of the uplift to the licensing and chair and vice chair positions, because having, as a member who sits on the licensing committee, watching the work that they have to put into that is quite substantial compared to us who turns up to, reads the reports, turns up to meetings, has a discussion. They're putting a lot of extra work in behind the scenes, having to read some extra harrowing stuff that I don't think any of us want to take part in, and generally speaking, help keep people of Cheltenham safe. So I think it's right that they are properly remunerated for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was just to come back again on the point that was raised by Councillor Nelson. My personal view is that the two regulatory committees are probably commensurate in the amount of work. Planning is focused on the long-term buildings that are here, and it requires, I guess, a deep knowledge of a few particular documents, so the JCS, the National Planning Policy Framework, and the various supplementary planning documents. Licensing, on the other hand, is a very diverse thing, so we have monthly hearings of anything from taxi licensing, tables and chairs on the pavement. Generally, they don't produce a lot of work. We have sexual entertainment venue licensing, which produces an inordinate amount of work. The one coming up next week, I believe, has 85 representations, and the report runs probably to over 100 pages. We also have alcohol licensing, where those committees are ad hoc, 3 members, because of the way it came from the magistrates system. And obviously, if you have a 3-person committee, the responsibility of those on that committee to make those right decisions is quite high. So I think it's a case of saying the two roles are probably commensurate in the amount of work, and I hope that explains it, but I'm more than happy to expand if anyone wishes to understand the role more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you, Councillor Willingham. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for clarity, it was a genuine question, and I absolutely agree with everyone that the licensing is a huge job, and I know that from personal experience from someone else involved in licensing stuff.
Okay, I don't have any other members indicating, so I'll come to Councillor Hay, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to Mr Russell and the panel for doing this. They give of their time freely to do this for us, and and it's a very important point that they are the independent remuneration panel that makes that assessment. If there's a lesson for any of us to learn, it would be that actually it is important that we feed into this process in due course. And just to be clear, I think you are coming back in a year's time rather than the 4 years, so that review will, of all the bits that Mr Russell has already mentioned that they're going to be looking at, so it will come back again in this time next year, I guess. But thank you very much to you and the panel.
Absolutely. Mr Russell, did you want to say anything just in closing? Or? Well, no, thank you, Mr Russell. In that case, we'll move to the vote. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, councillors. That is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, and again, thank you, Mr Russell. Okay, moving on to item 10 then, which is the Statement of Community Involvement. So this is the joint report from the Leader and Cabinet Member for Customer and Regulatory Services. Is it the Leader, or I don't know who is... who? Oh, sorry, Councillor Horwood to speak on this one. Thank you.
I think the Leader has one or two items on this agenda, so we're sharing it around. So the Statement of Community Involvement relates specifically to planning, and this is it's a statutory requirement to review this periodically. So we have to bring forward a revised version of how we plan to involve people in planning decision-making periodically. And this covers everything from the major consultations on things like local plans, the new strategic and local plan, through neighbourhood planning, right down to individual planning applications. And I would just like to thank Tracy Birkinshaw and John Sperling for the extensive work they put into this, and also Councillor Wilkinson in his absence for some valuable input. Oh, sorry, not in his absence. I beg his pardon. He slipped. He's behind you. There you go. Seasonal panto reference. Councillor Wilkinson for his input, particularly on the revisions that we've made to this version of the Statement of Community Involvement on hard-to-reach groups, which has, I think, made this a more up-to-date and relevant document. There are a couple of other areas where I'd just like to draw Councillors' attention to what might be changes from previous versions. One is quite a large section on neighbourhood planning, which is increasingly important, and where I can say from personal experience, having been involved in the neighbourhood planning process in Leckhampton, that I really valued the input and the support of CBC officers in helping us to take that process forward. And it's an important role of CBC to support both parishes but also unparished neighbourhoods who want to bring forward neighbourhood plans in the absence of a parish council, to support and facilitate that process. So there's a good section of this report on that. There's also just a small tweak in 5.12 to the way in which we approach individual planning applications, because as I think quite a lot of members know, due to all the resource constraints that we're very familiar with, the standard approach is now to notify only the immediate neighbour of a planning application. And I think there's been quite a lot of comment that occasionally that seems too narrow. And so there is a little tweak in paragraph 5.12 which just allows the case officer, depending on the context of the individual case, to perhaps consult more widely and to notify people more widely so that more neighbours are aware of a planning application. And that's something I know the new head of planning, Chris Gonn, or new head of development management, I should give him the correct title, is going to have a more detailed look at. Now, I know some government ministers, even the leader of the opposition, have been dismissing the idea of careful and considerate planning processes involving lots of consultation. I think that's wrong, personally. I think public consultation is an essential part of the process. I think you do have to take time. I do think you have to consider hard-to-reach groups, local communities, neighbours in the planning process, and I think that's an important part of what makes it an accountable and fair process. And on that basis, I commend this new statement of community involvement to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. So we'll start with any questions on that, on the item. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to ask, can I get an assurance that we will get documents related to viability assessments for affordable housing published with the application in accordance with paragraph 9 of JCS policy SD12, because we seem as a council not to be publishing these, which means there is no public scrutiny of the claims made by developers that they can't afford to provide any or enough affordable housing. And as is evident from real estate magnates such as the one in America facing 91 indictments and wishing to be President of the United States, they have a habit of inflating the costs and then underrepresenting the income. And if you look at the amount of dividends paid by some of the developers, there's got to be enough money for affordable housing, but we can't seem to scrutinise that. So can I get an assurance those documents will be published and open to scrutiny as part of this, please?
Yes, I think it's fairly straightforward. I mean, that is, as he says, in line with JCS policy, and we need to abide by that.
Okay, I don't have any other members indicating any questions, so we'll move to the debate on this. Do any members? I'll start with Councillor Atherstone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Horwood, for bringing us this report to us today, which I'm very supportive of. I just want to make a note in that the importance of neighbourhood plans locally, especially where an area does not have the support of a local parish council, I think is really, really vital. And it's great that we now have a way to allow residents in non-parish areas to have a voice to collect SIL money for various projects. However, when it comes to the creation of a neighbourhood plan, and it is fantastic that there is support by the council, it is a prerequisite that, I believe, that the neighbourhood plan must have a neighbourhood forum first. And the neighbourhood forum needs to have, I believe, a minimum of 21 members, including support from the local elected councillors. In many cases, it's not just a ward. Local neighbourhood plans are created across a division. I have been putting David and myself into Councillor Willingham, into our focus newsletters with a call to action to try to get residents to come forward to create the neighbourhood forum. And I've been doing it for a year, and I'm nowhere near 21 members. So I just want to say that it's quite a challenge in the first hurdle to actually create the forum, especially in those non-parish areas, because we just don't have that local sort of presence. We don't have a parish. So just wanted to note the difficulties in creating that group.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Atherton. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Horwood in his presence for introducing this report. My wife messaged me, by the way, to say that while you were saying I wasn't here, my daughter was apparently watching at home and pointing at the screen. So she knew I was here, Martin. And it marks my family out as special in Cheltenham because they watched YouTube live at these meetings. Anyway, that's by the by. The importance of the SCI shouldn't be underestimated, because when we get to the point of our strategic planning, and we're going to talk about some of this later on in this meeting, it is really important that we don't just passively receive communications and feedback from the elements of the community who are most likely to take part in consultations. And it is right that the relevant interest groups that are located all across Cheltenham take part, and they've done a huge amount to help us with our strategic planning over decades. However, it is my belief that in past stages of strategic planning, we haven't always heard from the widest number of voices that there is available in this town. And among those are some of the hard-to-reach groups that are listed in this report. So we might be thinking about younger people, we might be thinking about older people, we might be thinking about disabled people, we might be thinking about schools, colleges, other special interest groups that exist as well. And I see members around some of the members around the chamber are wearing LGBT lanyards, and the LGBT plus community is perhaps less likely to take part in these consultations as well. So I think if we're going to do strategic planning, we have to be really sure about who we want feedback from, and that is anyone and everyone, but we can't be passive in that. We do have to go out there and ask people. The days of strategic planning consultations being done by setting up a stall in the local shopping centre or in a community hall and hoping that people from all parts of society will turn up and talk to us should be long gone. And I hope that when we approve later on, I hope that we will approve out for consultation the next stages of our strategic planning. When we do that, we must all have in our minds, and our officers must all have in their minds, that when we get to that and we are doing consultation, we're proactively asking everyone in our community for their feedback, and we're not just passively relying on feedback from everyone, because it just won't come. We know that. No one should be excluded, and to stop that exclusion, we need to make sure we are going out there and asking people the question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Clearly, community involvement in the planning process is the beginning and the end of that process. And I think officers certainly and members of the planning committee certainly start as a base point, looking at the representations that they have received in connection with an application and ensuring that within that application those representations, both for and against, are understood and addressed and mitigated as far as they possibly can. So community involvement is absolutely critical. And actually, we all have a role to play in that. You know, we all get the weekly planning list without exception, whether you're on planning committee or not. And, you know, you have it all within your powers to communicate with your residents when you see those lists, applications which you think may be relevant and have concern for your residents. And you can knock on their doors and ask them if they've got any thoughts, were they aware of it, you can write to them, whatever. So we all have a role to play, not just the council. When you bear in mind that to post a letter now, first class, is £1.25, and to post a letter second class is 75p, clearly the cost of this council of writing to all residents in a street is significant. which probably explains why we don't do as much as we used to do. I'm really pleased that the new head of planning is going to have a look at this process again, because currently the law says you only need to do one of four things, which is, as stated, a site notice, a letter, the local paper, and something else. And clearly we need to do more than the minimum. And I think that's what Councillor Hall was saying, alluding to. We must do more than the minimum, because planning applications have real impacts on people's lives. And that's partly actually why I love, and members of the planning committee love planning committee, because we do really make a difference, and we really do have to listen to both sides. And in any planning application, we really upset half the people, and we really please half the people. So it is really a balancing act. This is a really good paper. A couple of things I want to ask, Martin. It's great now that councillors will be notified where a planning application involves the negotiation of a section 106 in their ward. I would actually suggest perhaps it may also consider adjacent wards, because often it may have more impact than just the one ward. One thing that we do really well here is we do more than we need to do in terms of consultation. And for example, we consult the civil society, we consult the architects panel, and that is really, really brilliant, and long may that continue, and there's no suggestion that it won't. I think that was all the points I wanted to raise, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Clucas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was quite struck by something that you said, Councillor Wilkinson. You said we need to be proactively encouraging everyone in our community. And if we're going to do that, and I agree with exactly that point you made, there is something that we have to do. And what we have to do, ladies and gentlemen, if it's one planning application or 1,000, is to make them understandable. Because I have to say, if you read planning applications, and you get through planning applications, and you understand planning applications, then you probably read the Financial Times as well. Because the reading age of the Financial Times and the Telegraph is 18 plus 21, okay? 18 to 21 plus. For newspapers such as The Star, it's about 8. For newspapers such as the Daily Mail, the reading age is about 12, okay? And so what you have to do is you have to shape the language you use so that people, wherever they are, whoever they are, whatever their education, can pick it up and say, oh, that looks good, or I don't want that. How do I get involved in stopping it? Because only then are you seriously going to tackle the issue of community involvement. Whatever kind of community operation you're seeking to undertake, it has to mean that people can access what you're saying, know how they can respond, know how they too can have a role in what we do. And if we don't do that, then frankly, we're only talking to the few, not to the many. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clucas. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think a statement of community involvement is very necessary, but it's worth recalling that the problems of consultation in local government have been picked up for a long time. As Douglas Adams wrote in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it was on display at the bottom of a locked filing cabinet stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." That was written, I think, in the 1970s. So people not being able to engage with local authorities and planning has been a long-time problem. The thing that I hope we will look at as well on this is how we deal with the consultation along cul-de-sacs. So if you have a development at the end of a cul-de-sac, as we have in the division I represent and in the area represented by St Mark's councillors, so Councillor Pinniger and Councillor Holliday, you'll find that the residents of Stone Crescent may well have been told about the proposed development, but the consultation didn't go all the way down Wharfdale Square to Alston Lane, meaning that some residents got told about the proposal and quite a lot didn't. And I think corner cases like that really do need to be picked up, because we need to do our best to ensure that people who will be affected by a development are adequately consulted. And if you don't tell the people who are going to have all the traffic driving past them and the construction traffic, when the bin lorries already can't get in there to service it without crashing into cars, they might well have a view, and if you don't tell them, you're not going to get that. So I hope that will be taken into account by the planners, who I am sure are listening to this item. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Willingham, for quoting one of my favourite authors. I'm sure when you were in Germany last week, you had your towel ready at all times, but thank you for raising it, and also thanks to all the fish. I'm sure Councillor Horde will apply to paras 1.11 and 1.12 in the appendix, that the lists are not exhaustive, but as Councillor Jeffreys knows, I've been in meetings this morning relevant to my role as Armed Forces champion for the Council. And the groups that are in there at 1.11 and 1.12 as consultees look remarkably like the protected characteristic groups that there are. And there is another statutory one to add, which is veterans, because it's not there. Just thought I'd raise that. So thank you. And thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I don't have anyone else. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hay.
Hello. It's me, Mike.
I just wanted to say a couple of things, because this is a joint report, which actually you don't need to hear from both of us, but actually I wanted to just express the fact that the importance of this document for me is that we will have a clear stated intention on how we engage with our residents and partners, and that's incredibly important. So I very much welcome the report.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Councillor Horwood, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Yes, I think there are a few points to reply to. Councillor Atherton made a very good point about unparished areas and the difficulty of bringing forward neighbourhood forums. I mean, there is a commitment in here for council officers to support unparished areas. Some of those onerous requirements are set in national legislation, so we don't have the scope to vary them, but I think happy to give her the commitment that as part of this process we are going to do our utmost to support some of the least well-off areas who are often the same as the unparished areas, particularly in bringing forward neighbourhood forums. But the example of Hester's Way is one that shows that this can be done, and they've got a very successful process which is bringing forward a very advanced neighbourhood plan already. Councillor Clucas and Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Harvey all made points about greater involvement, and I think Councillor Harvey's point about veterans is well made. Councillor Clucas is on accessibility, and Councillor Wilkinson certainly on having to take a proactive approach, which is specifically recommended in para 1.8 of the report, rather than just relying on passive processes. And message for Elodie Wilkinson, if she's watching, Daddy is here, and we're looking after him, don't worry, keeping him busy. Councillor Baker made the point quite rightly about doing more than the minimum, and Councillor Willingham made a similar point in terms of specific areas like cul-de-sacs where it's important to consult neighbours. I feel Councillor Jeffrey's eyes burning into my back if I promised that we would always do more consultation on individual planning applications, because obviously if you write 5 more letters compared to 1 or 2, that's 5 times the resource. So there is a balance to be struck here. But as I said, our new head of planning is looking at this whole area, so I'd encourage all those who have a strong view on that to get in touch with Chris Gom and to input into that process. But the revision to this policy at 5.12 does actually allow for in the right context and with the case officer's support, slightly wider consultation with neighbours, because I think the message is coming through loud and clear that is sometimes necessary. But I hope that answers most of the questions that were raised in the debate. But I didn't hear opposition to this. I heard a lot of support, and thank Leader particularly for her support for this. So very grateful for those, and again commend this to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. We'll go to the vote. Thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. We will now move on to item 11, which is the 2023-24 Treasury Midterm Report. That's the position as at the 30th of September 2023. And for this, we will hand over to the Cabinet Member for Finance and Assets.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, regulations require the Council to review and scrutinise the Treasury management activities undertaken each year. This includes the investments we hold, as well as the borrowings we've taken out to fund key projects and programmes. This report is important as it provides details of the outturn position for Treasury activities for the first 6 months of this financial year and outlines how activities are compliant with the Council's policies previously approved by members in March 2023. Now, members, you will read in the report that the General Fund borrowing costs are higher than forecast in the 2023-2024 budget. This is being driven by the fact that the Bank of England base rate is 1% higher than predicted when the budget was approved by full Council in February of this year. The vast majority of our borrowing is at a fixed rate and is therefore not subject to the recent rate rises and volatility. However, by way of example, the land purchase at West Cheltenham and also ongoing capital commitments, they're currently being funded via temporary short-term borrowing, as fixed rate lending is higher than forecast over the coming 24 months. Now, work is ongoing as part of the 2024-25 budget process to review our borrowing and minimise the risks of additional pressures. Officers do check rates on a daily basis and will determine the optimal opportunity to fix in what is currently a challenging marketplace, alongside maximising the opportunity to deliver capital receipts to repay down debt. Colleagues, this report has been presented and discussed at the Treasury Management Panel. Cabinet colleagues supported it, and I recommend to Council. I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Sorry. So do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just one question, which is a slightly small one. In the report, we talk about the Schroeder Income Maximiser Fund, which the Council has holdings, which had reduced its exposure to fossil fuel investments. And I understand at the moment we're kind of losing money on that one anyway, so we can't sell it while we're losing it because it would be too expensive to sell. But would it be the intention to dispose of that at some point in the future, as and when it might give us a return?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's always been this Council's intention to reverse their positions when it comes to that, especially given our climate commitment. But you're right, it's a question of when it's financially prudent to do so. I'm just reading my notes. I'm just trying to think as well. Am I right in saying the fund manager is looking to move? I think I'm right in saying the fund manager is looking to move out of that area as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I don't see any other indications for questions. Is that a question, Councillor Took?
I note that we've got 115 million of borrowing. Quick question, how much of that is Golden Valley and how does that compare with the contribution of the government to Golden Valley, which I believe is only 20 million?
Thank you. I think the whole of all of that borrowing you see there is the Council's capital commitment and borrowing. So I'm looking at the finance officer now. I'm thinking 38 or 42 of the capital investment, around about 38, 42 of the capital investment for the land purchase. Then, of course, then we got all the additional borrowings on top for the development of that scheme, which we Council approved. So the funding envelope of 95 million. So if you add those two together, Ref Council commitments over 150 million. And the recent government announcement was around 20 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, councillors. So we don't have any other questions, so we'll move to the debate. Do we have any members wishing to speak on this item? Don't see anyone indicating. So in that case, we'll move back to Councillor Jeffries to sum up. No. In that case, we'll move straight to the vote. Thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. We'll move now on to item 12. This is the Local Council Tax Support Scheme for 2024-25. Again, Councillor Jeffreys as Cabinet Member for Finance and Assets.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Colleagues, each year since 2013, this council has been required to set its local council tax support scheme for working age residents. Council tax support scheme for pensioners is not localised, and that continues to be provided by a bilateral scheme. Now, funding for the scheme was rolled into the revenue support grant for those colleagues that can remember the revenue support grant, and that was subject to annual cuts. As the council no longer receives revenue support grant, it must fund its share of the council of this scheme itself. In 2019-20, we adopted and approved this new scheme. One of the main aims was to ensure that most vulnerable and those with the lowest incomes continue to receive 100% support. The proposed council tax support scheme from the 1st of April 2024 for working age people will continue to be based on those 5 income bands, and there's a summary of the scheme at Appendix 5. Now, many of the residents are still grappling with the cost of living crisis, and this period of sustained high food inflation is particularly concerning. We know that those residents on the lowest incomes spend a disproportionate amount of their income on food. This scheme will provide some vital help for those most financially vulnerable residents. Continuing to provide this council tax support scheme across the 5 bands will mean that approximately 4,483 residents are eligible. As of October, just gone, this equates to just under £4.3 million worth of support. I trust colleagues will be able to support the recommendations in the report. I'd like to draw your attention, I think it was, to the 4th recommendation, which had a delegated authority in it. The long and short of that is that the government obviously give us the detail of their announcements when it comes to welfare changes, and we need to be in a position to adjust our scheme accordingly. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to the officers, all of the officers in the Revenue and Benefits team, for what continues to be an extraordinary amount of work supporting the residents of our town. And the report to you, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffreys. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Seacombe.
Thank you very much. How do you calculate, I mean, there must be many people who slip through all sorts of nets in the town structure. How do you calculate those on the lowest incomes? Perhaps they're on the black economy, working, sort of sporadically and that sort of thing. I'd be quite interested to know if you can come up with the process, not necessarily the figures, but I can think of 1 or 2 people in my ward who are not high earners and who would be on council tax support. But I wonder how you know about them and how you get their figures.
Thank you, Councillor Eacombe. Tricky one, I suppose, really and truly, but I suppose everybody gets the council tax bill through their doormat or electronically, depending on whether it's a physical one. And I suppose at that point, if they are in need of support and they are a low earner, they would then contact the council. So that's how we would know in terms of generally people would ask for that support. So how we calculate the numbers is tricky. Obviously, we look historically and so forth. So I'm not sure we can predict where the numbers are going to go. I know that post-COVID there was quite a lot of fluctuation. But calculating them is quite tricky when it comes to budgeting, but we do look at our historic data. I hope that gives you some idea of where we come from. Thank you, Councillor Seacombe.
Okay, I don't see any other councillors indicating questions, so we'll move to debate on this item. Do we have any councillors wishing to speak? No? Sorry, Councillor Wilkinson.
Just very briefly, I think every time this comes through council, I probably stand up and say something which is very similar, which is that it's great that this council is one of the few that's still using this mechanism to support some of our most vulnerable people in town. And I think we shouldn't have this discussion and debate this report without having that noted formally on the record.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harman. Can you just?
Sorry. Just briefly, Mr. Mayor. Conservative Group has supported you in this each year. We continue to do so, and certainly if I've got anything to do in the future, we always will. And just in reply to Councillor Clucas's question, I read the Racing Post, so I don't know what age group that makes me, but anyway.
Okay, I don't see any other councillors indicating to speak, so... Sorry? Sorry. I'll pass back to Councillor Jeffries, yes.
Thank you. I wasn't going to do a wrap-up, but Councillor Wilkins made a very valid point. This scheme, let's say, was first adopted in 2019-20, and it was current leader, Councillor Hay, who was the cabinet member for finance at the time that brought the scheme forward. Actually, our policy here in Cheltenham is having an impact across the county, with other districts are either doing this or looking to do this. So I think the point around supporting vulnerable residents is key, and I'm glad that Cheltenham's led the way on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. With that, we will move to the vote. Thank you, members. That is also carried unanimously. Okay, so we move on to item 13 now. That is the Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury Strategic and Local Plan, public consultation. For this, we moved, I'll ask Councillor Hayes to present the report from the leader.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm bringing this strategic and local plan report to Council today for approval of our commitment to working jointly with Gloucester and Tewkesbury. It is always a challenge to work across boundaries, and I would like to thank Tewkesbury and Gloucester members for their part in this. We all have to give and take. This is not by any means, or stretch of the imagination, a perfect report, but it's our starter for 10 to kick off a very important consultation. So by reviewing collectively our strategic and local planning policies, we can look at efficiencies in plan making and provide our communities, together with the wider stakeholders and the development industry, a clear single point of reference to the planning policies important to each of our areas. I think I reported way back ago that the government's aware of our approach. This was through the Planning Advisory Service. So the government are aware of our interest and are interested. We've gained engagement from them, from the Planning Advisory Service, to support project management, recognising the value of 3 councils working collaboratively in plan making. This is just a start of a conversation on the strategic and local plan. Forgive me, members, if I resort to SLP rather than saying strategic and local plans on every point. And nothing is on or off the table in respect of policy options. Regulation 18 is a technical term drawn from the planning regulations. It's a stage that presents a draft plan for review. We know that reviewing planning documents can be time-consuming and challenging, which is why we've introduced a 2-stage Regulation 18 process, which we do not have to do. But I think everything that we've heard about this, the SCI just now is that the heart, and that some of the comments that members have made, consultation is at the heart of our communities. I mean, we need to take partners with us, and we also need to take our residents with us. Stage 1 is what we are consulting on now. It's setting out a vision worked up by the member working groups across the 3 councils, together with earlier engagement on the review of the joint core strategy. For some members, it will not have the level of detail they may be expecting, and that's because at this stage we are introducing the key issues and priorities and testing these through the consultation. We may not have these right, and we want to test this in line with our local development scheme, which actually that sets the key milestones for plan preparation for the strategic and local plan. Stage 2 of Regulation 18 will be presented in early 2025. And so we've got a long way to go. This is the start. There'll be further consultations and obviously evidence building over that period of time. So it will come back to Council for the final Regulation 18 in early 2025. Because we do need to do that to gather the appropriate evidence, but also we build in the comments and the recommendations arising from this first stage consultation. And it's important that we will continue with the active engagement on all of the key issues. We recognise that local communities have invested a lot of time previously in the Joint Core Strategy and the Cheltenham Local Plan. Our intention is to build upon the strength of all of our local policies. our engagement is key, and I cannot stress enough the value of people getting involved. And we've heard a lot about that today as well, is that we have to go that extra mile to engage differently, to try and get more people to engage with us. So we've agreed a package of consultation mechanisms from face-to-face, online and social media, and we're all ambassadors to push out the message and encourage engagement there. We're particularly keen to try and connect with younger people. After all, the plans that we're looking at now are theirs, not ours. Or it may be in the latter part of some of our lives, should I say. I shouldn't make assumptions. But it's whether that's access to transport, to finding the right homes, to rent or buy, to jobs available and the skills needed to do those jobs, all within context of building upon the quality of our heritage and the wider built environment and green environments. As a council, we are clear that climate change and nature recovery are key drivers for us. We tried to push sustainability policies through when it was the JCS, but the national planning policies at that time acted as a blocker. We're in a very different place and time now, and there is much to gain from challenging to drive significant policy change. The Planning Liaison Member Working Group is a valuable resource feeding into the preparation of the SLP and has been very active within the wider Joint Member Working Group that has met to support the preparation of the consultation document that I'm now presenting to you. I would like to express my thanks for the investment of time and positive challenge that those members jointly, or Cheltenham's and the joint ones, all gave to the officers, but also to thank the officers across the three authorities for all the work that they've put into this. And this will continue to be an important working group as we move through the phases of plan preparation. There is a question that was raised with me earlier, and of course now my computer's decided it needs me to log in again, because what we have done is, there was a question that was posed to me earlier today about the consultation and how we were going to be doing that, and the fact that actually the list is very, very long and quite detailed, and not everybody will want to fill it in from page 1 to the last page. So what we're doing, just to inform members, is that we are something called Citizen Lab platform is being procured to support the consultation, which is an interactive platform, and stakeholders will be able to respond to as little or as much of the consultation as they wish. The Regulation 18 consultation will be broken down so that readers can easily navigate to different parts of the consultation dependent upon their interest. So if you're only interested in biodiversity, you'll be able to go just there and do that. If you're interested in building on Greenbelt, then you can go there. If you're interested in all sorts. So you can it will be broken down so that you can make your choices as to where you fill that in. So I'm happy to take questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. We'll start with Councillor Clue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Leader, for the outline that you've just given. I should be aware I've been having terrible trouble with my information technology package, so I haven't been able to read the report in full. You did say that there was nothing off the table in your remarks, and I just want to clarify with you what that would mean for those local green spaces that were confirmed in the local plan. Do I assume that they are still confirmed, or do we have to go through the whole process again with residents, schools, scouts, guides and so on to ensure that they are reconfirmed?
So I think another member asked this question of me as well. So we currently have a number of urban green spaces, as you know, and this council has had clear all council debates in respect of our local green spaces, with very clear statements in respect of safeguarding those policies. But as we prepare the evidence to present at a future examination in public, we will need to review all possible sites for development as we test that no stone unturned to put before an inspector. However, having said that, we have clear principles and justification around the local green spaces as we established through the JCS. And this will be a very important factor in any testing. So we have to test, but we don't. This council has made that commitment, but through the process we have to test.
Mr. Mayor, the issue in relation to those areas inside the Cheltenham boundary, will that be a matter purely for Cheltenham, or will that be a matter for the 3 local authorities to take a decision?
Items that are attached to Cheltenham specific within our boundaries is entirely our decision. That's one of the things we've been really perhaps should make clear is that for us as Cheltenham, we have our own sovereignty on what happens within our boroughs. Obviously, we need to work across boundaries to make sure that we get the best for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Councillor Horwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Clucas has slightly stolen my thunder because my question was on a similar theme. I mean, obviously, in any review of a local plan, in a sense, all policies are up for grabs. But as Councillor Clucas has suggested with the local green space policy, which I absolutely agree with her on, there are some key flagship policies attached to our current local plan, which residents had expected to go all the way through to 2031 rather than this slightly earlier process. And they include our climate change planning policies and our climate change supplementary planning document, which has been amazingly successful. I mean, brought a pipeline of over 1,000, well, up to 1,000 houses coming forward already in the private sector, which were going to be heated by renewable energy. There's our successful target of 40% affordable housing, which is well ahead of the 2 neighbouring councils, and indeed our green belt border at Hatherley and Hester's Way, where residents again had expected that to be protected through to 2031. So I suppose again, I mean, similarly to Councillor Clucas, I'm looking for a reassurance. I absolutely take her point, and she's exactly right, that as part of this process to build an evidence base, we need to look at options. But is our expectation and our desire as a council to try and, at the very least, preserve and, if possible, strengthen and enhance these flagship policies going forward?
Thank you, Mayor. So if I look at the planning policies around the climate change first, and then I'll pick up the affordable housing. So we know that the strategic local plan will provide the opportunity to strengthen policies relating to climate change that were not there in the JCS. This is already being reviewed by Debbie Baker, who recently joined us, as many members know, and will be tested further by that SLP sustainability consultants. In terms of the affordable housing, that's based upon viability. The JCS policy, which I think Councillor Willingham mentioned, is policy SD12. That sets out the provision with 40% in Cheltenham and Tewkesbury have 20%. In Gloucester and Tewkesbury and Gloucester have 20%. So we're way ahead of the curve already against our other authorities of what we determine. But there will be a review of housing policies which will be based upon the Gloucestershire-wide housing needs assessment. I think I would reiterate what I said a minute ago to Councillor Clucas, is that we are very clear as an authority what we want, and we have fought doggedly for that, and we will. That is hopefully this council's intention, and we will have that vote. But I cannot guarantee that, because obviously we're going out to consultation, and what the people tell us will also matter, that we need to hear part of that consultation in whatever format their feedback may come. I can only reiterate that this council and the view of this chamber is that those are things that we have all spoken cross-party in support of, but they have to be included in the examination. and gather that evidence and revisit that evidence. And actually, as we all know, it's important to revisit evidence because things change. And if we don't change where we need to change, then we could be the losers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Chelling.
Thank you. This is a question more broadly, I suppose, on consultations, because I've noticed when we see responses from consultations previously that there are always people from outside the area of concern who respond. And I suppose it was just a question about what weight do we give to people who are responding from, say, other parts of the country compared with the people whose immediate lives are going to be affected by the decisions that are made as a result of the evidence base. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chelling. I just took some advice on that because actually what we do is we don't separate those out, but generally speaking, I am told that those that come from outside are more often developers than residents.
Okay, I don't have any other members indicating any questions, so we'll move to debate. Do we have anyone wishing to speak? Sorry, Councillor Atherstone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the report. In sort of general, I think it's very thorough in terms of its 42 pages, and the consultation it's very much it feels like it's focused very much from a technical perspective to a certain degree. Councillor Hay mentioned about accessibility in people not being overwhelmed by its length, even if it is reduced to perhaps some 20 pages. So I think it's great news, so thank you for confirming that actually don't be put off by its length. Please do just log on, give your feedback, and just jump straight to the area that is of interest to you. Just an observation, really, is that I think the word deprivation is mentioned once in the document, and we recently had an overview and scrutiny task group to look at how we're going to, as a borough, tackle multiple areas of multiple deprivation. And I know that this challenge isn't unique to Cheltenham. I had a quick look on the index of multiple deprivation, and we have 6 wards in Cheltenham with the highest concentration within the higher deciles. There are another 4 or 5 with small pockets. And I checked the same map for Gloucester. They have more wards affected by, and not so much in Tewkesbury, but it is still present. So I know this is the sort of starter for 10, and that we will be going out again in 2025 for more feedback from residents of Cheltenham that live here and work here. And I would just like to perhaps for us to work collaboratively with our Gloucester and Tewkesbury friends in that we try to seek something a bit more about the health and well-being, the social value of how residents feel we should be tackling things to increase equal opportunity, to improve healthy lifestyles, rather than what a town needs to do economically. How can the residents influence what they feel will help their own economic prosperity and health and happiness and wellness? So it's mainly an observation, but something that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Atherstone. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to put on record my thank you to the leader for her exceptional work on this piece of work. It's been an incredible set of negotiations, and I was very lucky to cover for the leader during a very brief period during this process. And I have to say, I was incredibly relieved when she came back to work because this has been an immense process of trying to align the values of so many different councils at times which haven't even been controlled by the same political party, which I imagine causes some challenges. But I'm also really excited, particularly from a climate change perspective, about this opportunity to do this combined planning strategy. Because ultimately, one thing I think we all know is that climate change and its impacts, particularly in the respect of biodiversity, in terms of farming, in terms of flood defences, it does not stop at the boundaries that local authorities might have had drawn in a map back in 1836. It's really, really important that we are able to work with our partners on our boundaries, particularly where there are sites on our boundaries that we know which are at particular risk of flooding or biodiversity deprivation. I think this is a really exciting opportunity, particularly with our supplementary planning document, to say, hey guys, any chance we could all hold the same policy on this? And I think there's a real appetite for that, because we know that our document at the moment really is best in class. It's been well loved and stolen in cases, with permission, mind you, by other local authorities who are looking to do their own climate SPDs. So I think this is an incredible opportunity, and I thank the leader immensely for the work he's done to make this happen.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, obviously, I support this because this is the start. But we should be looking... I looked at the map when the leader said about we've got to look at Gloucestershire, because we live in the county of Gloucestershire. Some of us are representatives on the county council. And I looked at the map, and there are large areas within our county that have got deprivation. There are large areas which beg out for commercial and housing development. But we're concentrating a lot of it in the three main urban areas, which is putting pressure on our infrastructure, our schools. The Forest of Dean send a school the size of Pickford to Cheltenham and Gloucester and to Ross every day for education, because there's not the investment in the schools in the Forest of Dean. And when you look at the map, some of the most rural areas in our county would take some more housing and spread the load. The commuting is bad news for the environment, it's bad news for people. But if we look just at the three main areas, it's going to make it worse, because the people in Gloucestershire live in the whole county. I have a son who works 1 day in Worcester, 3 days in Gloucester, and another day in Bristol. That is all commuting. And people choose to live in an area, and that is their right. I'm not going to deprive people if they want to live on the North Cotswolds and work in Chatham. I know a guy who works in Exeter, lives in Cheltenham, goes in 2 days a week, but it still costs him to commute. So we've got to look at the bigger picture as well. To concentrate, we've got to talk to the county as a whole. It's very difficult to talk to three councils, as you say, and to keep them on board. But we mustn't lose the ambition to spread the load.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think some of the points have been alluded to already, but I wanted to make the point that a lot of this talks about the new developments, the new communities, so promoting healthy and resilient communities. We've got to not forget the existing communities and to make sure that the infrastructure from new developments actually goes in and make sure that there are school places, there are libraries, a whole host of things that the infrastructure comes from the new development doesn't mean that the existing developments are disadvantaged. It should be beneficial to all. The other thing to remember is that whilst Gloucester and Cheltenham are both predominantly urban areas, there are a lot of rural parts of Tewkesbury. And I think there is a risk, if we are not careful, that the issues that affect rural communities could well be forgotten or downplayed in this, and that does not serve everybody well. And I think it really is important that when we look at this, we make sure that what we are delivering here works for our communities, but that we do not forget there are rural communities that we need to protect because they are part of the green lungs around us, but they're also places that people go from Cheltenham, from Gloucester, for the weekend to escape. They go for a day out, and it's really important that we protect that as well. So those are my comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willingham. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of things have jogged me to jump to my feet, because some people have mentioned it. What I've heard around the Chamber today is quite a lot of interesting things and very important things when it comes to this plan making. Thank you for bringing this report. Nothing's perfect, as you say, but it's the start of the 10. We've heard biodiversity, climate change, comes to my colleague. We've heard rural communities, infrastructure. Actually, this is about a housing crisis and houses. Because, I mean, since I've been alive, I think we've had a housing crisis. Luckily, I've got a house. But there are actually an increasing number of people that are homeless. And there's been this housing crisis. So, I mean, I know I've had several colleagues with the officers on this, several conversations with the officers on this in terms of housing policy and their length of time to get developed. Because let's not forget, we had a joint core strategy. In fact, I think before that, somebody will probably remember something called a spatial strategy, which was just before my time, I must say. And then it was the joint core strategy, now it's the joint strategic plan. So these consultations are really important. Councillor Wilkinson mentioned hard-to-reach groups. And I can remember doing a housing and homeless consultation myself on the streets of this town. So those hard-to-reach groups, especially younger people, are the most important of all. So I'd just like colleagues to bear in mind that when we talk about all these nice things we talk about in all of our priorities, that actually there is a housing crisis, and this plan making eventually gets to, hopefully, be part of the solution to that problem. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, that was the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Jeffries, can you just... Sorry, thank you. That was the last speaker I had down. Oh, sorry, Councillor Horwood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, can I commend the leader on her report? And I think there seems to be an emerging consensus that the actual consultation document itself is not perfect, which I would endorse. But I would commend her on the task she's undertaken of trying to juggle not only an impossible timetable where the 3 councils are involved, but also the needs of those other councils and of individual councillors who've I know, made representations to her, and it's been a very difficult task. Nevertheless, I think we do have to draw attention to the drawbacks in the actual consultation document itself, even though Citizen Lab will provide a rather broader and wider means of consulting on this, and I think it's important to acknowledge that too. So, for instance, there are references in her report to nature recovery, which is quite right. And you don't have to be watching Planet Earth 3 to know that nature recovery is a really urgent priority. It's something that addresses an existential crisis alongside climate change, yet that isn't mentioned in the vision and objectives in the Regulation 18 document. The document also mixes up climate mitigation and adaptation, which are actually 2 separate concepts. Also, when it comes to the housing options, and I think Councillor Jeffries is quite right that we address the housing crisis in part through supply, it has a list of pros and cons, which is not completely normal in a consultation document like this. And in particular on things like urban concentration, in other words, trying to intensify housing within the city centre, within the town centre here, and within the urban area, which I would welcome, and I know others would welcome, and indeed dispersed rural development, so smaller, more modest developments in rural villages and small towns where small-scale development helps to support rural post offices and shops and pubs and so on, and primary schools, and make them more viable. The list of cons in this document massively outweighs the list of pros that are listed, which seems to give the implication that we've almost made up our minds before we start that those options are not acceptable, which I think gives a misleading impression of where this council's coming from. So I think for those reasons, this is a very problematic document. But I take her point that this is the starter for 10, and I think what we have to look forward to is that the subsequent Regulation 18 consultation and then the actual drafts of the strategic and local plan as it progresses are a significant improvement on this document. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. So that was the last speaker I had on this item, so I'll go back to the leader to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be brief in my summing up because actually I heard everybody's points that they made, and I started off by saying that this is not a perfect document. The most important thing is that we see this as an opportunity that we all respond to. At the end of the day, we are all ambassadors of our communities. We are the ones that are out there day in, day out, talking to our residents. And it's down to us as those ambassadors to encourage our residents and, if need be, support where there isn't necessarily the facility. You know, if you're talking to an older person who's not sure about the process, you can do that. You can encourage. Equally so with a younger person. I think I'm not going to pick out individual points that were made because actually it is, please do respond to the consultation. They're all valid points and they will form part of that consultation. There will be a summary that's produced. I think this is, and it is all, as I said, it's all about effective communication. So it's us and actually what the council are doing. The only one I would pick up on in particular was the mention that Councillor Atherstone gave around health and wellbeing, and actually we're already engaged via the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we're drawing in the NHS plus public health as we see this as a missing. So that's already happening, but thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. We will move to the vote. Right, thank you, councillors. That is carried with 32 votes in favour and 1 abstention. Item 14 then, the Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury Community Infrastructure Levy Joint Committee. Again, this is a report from the leader, so Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Mayor. So, to introduce this report is our approach to community infrastructure levy and the Section 106 has been, of course, of keen interest to this council. Why wouldn't we? It's quite right that we are. So reports to Cabinet and Council last year helped us set a clear direction to add greater transparency and governance. Planning committee members will be starting to see changes in reporting to committee with a new head of planning on board, and we're looking to drive planning improvements forward as we work through that improvement plan, which was developed in response to the planning advisory peer review that we had earlier this year. Members will be well aware that this, because it's been reported in the past, that the community infrastructure levy, and again I'm going to call it SIL, that SIL pot is growing, but it is at a very slow rate. And there are two main reasons for this. The instalment policy that included in our approval SIL policy and the strategic allocations not presenting on the trajectory as had been anticipated. And we all know the various reasons around that. But members will have seen positive work within the neighbourhood SIL panel, which has seen an awful lot of money dispersed amongst our communities across a variety of neighbourhoods. And as that strategic prop grows, the timing is right to have now the appropriate governance in place to start making those allocations. So this report set out in here are the terms of reference for the joint committee, together with a refreshed infrastructure. And I do hope that members will welcome the fact that it is now a much broader infrastructure list than was previously there, and Cheltenham's I'm pleased to say, very much worked up, largely with costings complete, which always shows that actually Cheltenham leads the way in a lot of these things. And I know that in my discussions with the leader at Tewkesbury Borough Council now, I've been able to talk to them, and they've got a much better handle and understanding of what it is they want. So they will be developing their infrastructure list over time as well with costings. So this report provides terms of reference to the Joint Committee, as I said, with the refreshed infrastructure list. And that is focused on our priorities, recognising that a new infrastructure delivery plan is needed to support the SLP. The Joint Committee now being presented builds on the collaborative working with our partners in Gloucester and Tewkesbury as well. And it recognises that development arising outside of our area has impacts on our infrastructure. It enables the councils to look collectively and strategically at the infrastructure demands affecting our area. And it recognises that the costs of infrastructure are significant, and they way exceed the funding drawn from SIL. So it's important that we work together with to offer those opportunities to identify wider strategic funding sources where SIL can help much fund investment. So we, as I said, have reviewed our infrastructure list, and this will be a foundation document for the work of the Joint Committee. But in the light of Cheltenham's priorities identified, we are comfortable with the approach to continuing to pool strategic SIL, as this offers the greatest opportunity to maximise match funding and wider infrastructure investment. We can't do that alone. As we all know, we're confined by our boundaries. We're restricted on our height, but we can go up. We don't want urban sprawl. Tewkesbury have far more ability to build, so it's really important that we stay in communication and work together, because actually 3 of us achieving stuff for the best of our residents can be achieved at a much greater speed if we do that together and pool our resources, so pooling the money. However, there are triggers for review that have been built into those terms of reference to ensure that we have safeguards to revisit that in the future if it's appropriate. It's one of the things that has recently changed in there. I was very conscious of the fact that sometimes, we have a development that comes left field and unexpected, but actually creates a significant, or has the potential to create a significant impact on our infrastructure. So there is the built-in ability within those terms of reference to say that actually, if I'm not going to find an example because everybody will focus on the example, but there are occasions where a building happens in this room, and the cost of doing this room is going to cost more than the infrastructure money that could be levied at it. So there's a perfectly legitimate rationale for member councils, that's all 3 of us, to go back to each other and say that actually, do you know what, in this instance, please can we consider? So it's almost like bidding into that joint committee. And so I think that gives us a really valuable opportunity. I think that there's a lot for the committee to do, but these are the basic terms of reference. And I think that, as you can see in those terms of reference, one of the things that's really important is that we retain our own sovereignty in our decisions. So this isn't going to be, whilst the Joint Committee have got decision-making powers, it's not going to be without the consultation of each of the respective councils that come together. And also the strength of that is that it's being bolstered in terms of the membership of that. So that membership will now have 2 members from each authority, the leader and the relevant planning lead. I'm happy to take any questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Do we have any questions on this item? Sorry, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, this is a great report. Let me say that first of all. I'm glad to hear that Cheltenham are once again leading the way, which doesn't surprise me, and I'm sure it won't surprise many of the members in the chamber today. I do have one question, and it relates to page 258, 2.4. There's a pie chart there. Who doesn't love a good pie chart? Yeah. But I was having a look at this, and I thought, I actually can't make this work in my mind. I think I know what we've got, that 70 to 80%, which is the strategic allocation, the 5% administration And then those two other chunks, I think I know what the intention is there, but I don't know. Would it be Councillor Horwood that would take that one? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that we've discussed SIL many times in cabinet over the last year or so. But if we could just perhaps make that a little bit clearer. I mean, if I can't understand it, I imagine lots of other people won't be able to either. Thank you.
If I can reply on the leader's behalf, because this, I think, originated from an infrastructure report that I produced. The trick is in the word from, because it says in the two little pie bits which represent SIL for neighbourhood projects from parished and unparished areas, it says 15 to 25% from parishes and 15% from unparished areas. So together, those represent 15% or so of the whole, but each one only represents, roughly speaking, half of the town. So the 15% from unparished areas is 15% from those areas, but it's probably, roughly speaking, 7% or so of the whole town, hence a smaller wedge. And likewise, the grey one, which says 15 to 25% from parishes, again, represents roughly half the town. So although it is 15% from those areas, it's only probably roughly 7% from the whole. So that's why those two. Perhaps we need to add a note to the future iterations of this graph to make that a bit clearer for anyone who is, A, reading the papers, and B, good at maths, which obviously Mr Collins is both.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got two questions. So the first one is that given the delivery of strategic infrastructure, such as highways, schools, libraries, are the responsibility of Gloucestershire County Council, who are not a SIL authority, what dialogue has there been with the County Council, and are they satisfied with this report? And the second question is, if as detailed on page 276, bullet items 42, 43 and 44, education requirements and M5 Junction 10 are not going to be funded from SIL, can I get a cast iron assurance that when the County Council seek a Section 106 agreement to cover these, the Section 106 agreement will be incorporated into any planning developments and not refused by the local planning authority as double dipping? Because otherwise, how are we going to get the necessary strategic infrastructure, such as schools, libraries and highways, that are essential to make developments viable, delivered, if the developers aren't forced to put that money into them? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willingham. There's a couple of points, and actually it's given me an opportunity to actually respond to you, because there's been, just to reassure you, the County Council actually sit on the Joint Advisory Group with us currently, so there's plenty of dialogue that the leader and the County Council sit around that table currently at all the Joint Advisory Group meetings. And one of the things that's come out since the report was published is that the County Council have asked us to reflect on the list of the infrastructure list as drafted, and we've talked with GCC on this. And members, I mean, as you rightly point out, David, members will be fully aware of the financial challenges in respect of that key infrastructure and the need to give confidence to the government with no stone unturned. What we also need to do is to, and GCC and their preferred route is to seek contributions on the major highways projects as well as education, and so education through Section 106 is their preferred route. But in terms of the highways projects, such as the M5 and Junction 10, and in reality, there may need to be a blend of Section 106 and SIL. So that's an amendment that I'd like to just, in terms of the wording, so it's not the recommendations as such, it's just an amendment. So I hope that would give you the reassurance that, you know, it's not going to happen. I mean, the only reason it's not going to happen is because the SIL pot's not big enough. Or...
Okay, thank you, Councillor Haig. Councillor Harman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. just to say that looking at the terms of reference, there's a plan to replace the panel with a joint committee. I've noticed, which is not a problem. And I noticed that I think you as leader would represent us. Each council has one vote, as it were. And I just, if you've got any reflections on that working, I see no reason why it shouldn't, but I just wondered how that worked and if it had a chairman.
Councillor Harman, the committee, until the committee's actually been agreed today, no, it doesn't have a chair, but the terms of reference has gone through all three of our respective authorities, and it's replacing the joint advisory group. So it will be a properly formulated, which actually, in my opinion, is much more transparent and open and accountable than the joint advisory group is. So yes, it's the leaders plus the other authorities planning. I mean, in our case, I would expect to be putting forward onto that panel our planning portfolio holder. What other councils do will be entirely up to them. Sorry, I should have said yes, one vote.
Councillor Baker.
Well, firstly, congratulations to the leader on her ability to answer all these planning questions. I'm impressed. A couple of questions for me. What is the timing? Because obviously, as with the plan process we've talked about previously, each authority has to agree this process. So are we the first authority to agree this, and the others will then follow? So I just wanted to ask you that timing, because we're often being told that we've been sat on this money, sat on our hands doing nothing. Clearly, we've now got a structure in place to deliver that and start spending this money. So when do you anticipate this process to be complete in terms of the three councils electing their members and having their first meeting, and then money start to be spent? And secondly, I understood that Section 106 took preference to SIL, so that when a development comes forward, the Section 106 is established first, and what that is going to demand, and that the SILs come in after that. Is that wrong? Thank you.
So, Councillor Baker, I think in terms of the planning, I was going to say I'm going to defer to you and our officer because your planning experience is far, far greater than mine, but thank you for the compliment, I'll take it. So, in fact, I mean, Gloucester City, our Cabinet are meeting on the 6th of December, and then that final decision for them will go to Council on the 25th of January, and Tewkesbury is still progressing their decision-making in the new year. And then, once they've done that, I guess that's when the Joint Committee would then meet. I think it's important as well. I know we've been criticised. I just want to come back on this. We have been criticised for not spending any of the SIL pot. Frankly, I think Mark Hawthorne said to me at one of the meetings that we're at is that 11 million won't even build a wall for a school. So, but they have not at any point come back to us to ask for any money whatsoever. But, you know, we are working with them, and our relationship with the County Council has improved massively in the last few years. Did I answer both of your questions then? No, which one didn't I answer? The second one was, remind me.
I can pick it up with.
Oh, the section 106. It's the County Council have said that what they'd prefer is Section 106 monies rather than SIL. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hay. That's the last question I had noted, so we'll move to debate. Do any see any members wishing to speak? Councillor Horwood first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to really warmly congratulate the leader on her negotiation of these joint terms of reference. Again, another sort of quite difficult joint process, I think. I think, if I'm right, I don't know whether she slightly misspoke there, that the Joint Administrative Group obviously is continuing for the strategic and local plan generally, but these terms of reference are for a SIL committee, which just addresses SIL, so it will replace the JAG in terms of SIL, but not the JAG in total. I just want to draw members' attention to two of the recommendations in particular, which are really significant, and they're Recommendation 3 and Recommendation 4. And the fact that these are coming to a vote of this council is something that we promised in the SIL governance arrangements in June last year. And it's a really important safeguard, and the leader spoke about sovereignty, but this is a really important safeguard that this whole council gets to vote on these. One is the pooling of this 80% or so strategic community infrastructure levy by the 3 partner councils. Now, of course, we could, I suppose, say, we want our bit of SIL and Tewkesbury and Gloucester have their bits of SIL. The current contributions to the roughly £11 million pot are, I think, Gloucester 1.5 million or so, us 2.5 million or so, and Tewkesbury 8 million. So I think on balance we're okay with pooling it at the moment. And I think, this is now a shared process, and it is things of shared interest, obviously, but it is really important that we recognise this has huge benefits for Cheltenham, this pooling of the SIL at strategic level, providing that we get a vote on what goes into that final list. Now, in previous years, when presenting the report on this every year, I've been pretty grumpy about the content of the list, because it was basically 56 million quid's worth of roads. And that wasn't what I think a Liberal Democrat-led council should be funding in terms of infrastructure. We wanted green transport, we wanted health infrastructure in there as well, and a much more holistic approach to the whole idea of infrastructure. And if you look into the depths of this report, at page whatever we're up to now, high 200s, you will see a much broader range of projects in the infrastructure list. And so recommendation 4 is to approve that, in effect, an interim list. This isn't, there is a lot of work to be done before this money is spent and the final sort of projects are funded. But this is, you are approving the interim infrastructure list. And this time, I will warmly recommend that infrastructure list, because it does include all those green transport, cycling hubs. It includes, even from the Tewkesbury side, it includes EV charging points. It includes health infrastructure. There's a pitch for a new GP surgery, for upgrading our recycling facilities. It is exactly the kind of infrastructure list we should be looking at. So I would very warmly recommend this report, and in particular, items 3 and 4, which are in fulfilment of our pledge to give this whole council a vote on these crucial items. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. Councillor Baker.
It's clear that we're entering into sort of a new era here of collaboratively working with our neighbours, both in terms of the local plan and now in terms of this. And that has got to be welcomed and congratulated. And it's absolutely brilliant that the 3 authorities are working so well. And that County Council too has been involved in the process. Before we get too excited about the 11.9 million, I think the bids from the 3 authorities are 32 million. So there's an awful long way to go before we get our pet projects, if ever. Talking of pet projects, when I look at the list, I do ask myself how that list was, because I don't recall personally being involved in this list. Obviously, the list reflects some of our corporate ambitions and policies and so on, and it's all fine. And I think, far better to have our new Petersfield Community and Sports Hub than a stretch of road somewhere. It's going to be deliver far more value to our town. So what I do hope, though, is that this isn't a list which can't be changed and can't be added to as new ideas and new projects come along. And I do think it's going to be a really challenging process, as Councillor Horwood mentioned. There's pooling the resource when, if I was Tewkesbury, I would be very protective. I actually want to make sure that I got my more than a lion's share. So it's going to be a really interesting experiment in this. And I don't know how innovative it is compared to other local authorities, but certainly Cheltenham does seem to be leading the way and setting an agenda in terms of collaborative working, which is to be congratulated. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of what's on there in the list of projects, so the Petersfield Community and Sports Hub, I fully support. I think the community that I represent will not just welcome that, they will be grabbing it with open arms, because that investment is so much needed. Equally, the enhancements around the railway station and a whole host of things to do with cycling are very much welcome, as is the public realm for our high street. Again, something important to me as the nighttime economy champion. That public realm is really important. And of course, the other areas, again, our partners, they've got their bits that they want. What I don't see in this is any recording of requests for funding put through from the County Council on the charts on page 277, 278. And I think we really have missed a trick. They just say Cheltenham Borough Council, Tewkesbury Borough Council, Gloucester City Council, and we really need something in there that records what the County Council as a strategic partner is doing. And we need to think about things like money for hospitals, NHS. There are a whole host of things that seem to be missing in this, and that's what concerns me. There's nothing in there. Whilst it does say GCC next to a lot of those, they're not specifically pulled out. The other thing that, again, concerns me is that the Section 106 for the strategic things like schools, like Junction 10, is that cast iron guarantee that if the county bid for it, they will get it? Because on a smaller scale, we have planning applications where the county council has said we need a Section 106 agreement to deal with 400% oversubscribed parking, and the planning authority have said, sorry, not our problem, back to you. And the residents that we represent will look at this and say, you both work for the public good, a plague on both your houses. We really do need to make sure that this is aligned between the four authorities and the other bits of public service that work to serve the public. And I don't have that warm, fuzzy feeling that all of that has been joined up yet. I'm not going to vote against it, but I do think that we need some more work. It just does genuinely concern me that a lot of this is very local, and that maybe the strategic things that we need are not quite formed, and we need to think about some of these in more detail. So that's where I'm at on this one. I think that, as I say, there should be an entry making it clear what the county have bid for, and that isn't in there, in that request for funding, in the coloured charts at the end of the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Willingham. Next, I have Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take some of the points that Councillor Willingham has made, and I'm getting a little bit parochial about this. People keep mentioning Junction 10. At the moment, Junction 10 is on hold. The funding is not there. It's got to go back to the Secretary of State, and between now and then, we'll definitely have a general election, and we'll have a different government, whatever colour that would be, because it would be elected on a different manifesto. Whether it be blue, red, pink, doesn't matter. It would be elected on a different manifesto, and it would have to go back to the Secretary of State. Now, on Junction 10 hangs 4,000 houses for our town. Sorry, 5,000 houses with the West Cheltenham, North, and also a link road into Cyber and the other development and employment land that is in there. It is very important. And we've already been told that when I stood in this council chamber 12 years ago, I was told it was going to cost 25 million to do Junction 10. We're up to 127 at the moment and rising. We don't know. We've compulsory purchased houses along the Tewkesbury Road, and we must get it sorted with the county, because the 106 will not cover it. We know that the housing on the northwest extension will pay a levy towards Junction 10. We don't know how much yet, because I don't think we know how much Junction 10 is going to cost yet, but it's been allocated 120 million plus. So we must really work hard with our fellow councils and the county, which is the Highway Authority and the Education Authority. There are 3 schools in there, 2 primary and 1 senior, and a lot of green infrastructure which needs paying for, which the county have recently said they will retain and do. So I will go along with this, but there's still a long way to go at getting it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to echo the comments that others have made about working across different councils. It's clearly extremely challenging to do that, and the comment that Councillor Horwood made about the list of projects actually being the things that people tell us about when we talk to them about development is really important. And people don't just say, we just want that road and that roundabout to get in and out of the development that's being built. They say, what about the GP surgeries? What about the education? What about healthcare? What about all kinds of other stuff? Cycle paths increasingly are mentioned. And that's a really important thing for us to bear in mind as we pass this document today, and I hope we will, because when we're approving new houses, and inevitably we will, we need the infrastructure to go along with that, and it isn't the simple lists that we've been presented with at this council in the past. I think it's important, though, just to counter some of the things that people have been saying about the pooling and how it would be in Tewkesbury's interest just to have all of that money retained in Tewkesbury, because they will be discussing this in the new year. Let's face it, guys. Where do people from Bishop's Cleeve, Churchdown, Brockworth, Sherdington, Tewkesbury, and all the little villages in that big rural district come to consume local services? I can tell you it isn't all Tewkesbury town centre. A huge number of them will come to Cheltenham. Probably slightly fewer go to Gloucester because of the nature of their city centre. Ours is more vibrant. But those are the 2 centres. That's not a dig, but it's just a fact. I'm not being parochial about this, but that is just a fact. So it would really not be in Tewkesbury's interest to ask for all the money to just be spent in Tewkesbury, because their residents would lose out, because they know that they have a shared interest in this process, because their residents use all the services that are in Cheltenham and Gloucester. And that is a really key principle that I'm sure our leader, that the leader of Tewkesbury and the leader of Gloucester have been working on as part of this project.
Okay, thank you, councillors. I don't have any other members indicating to speak, so on that one we'll go back to the leader for any final remarks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll go back to the introduction I made at the start, is that GCC are fully engaged with this process. And I'm, that is such a big difference in terms of where we were at. And of course, we will be consulting with wider stakeholders. Within the report, there is, I'm slightly hesitant, because within the report, there is reference to some of the county list. At 16, you've got mass transit. At 37, you've got GP surgeries. At 38, you've got the express bus service to consider. And then 39 to 41 is cycle links. All of that is either shared or county. So we do have a county list. But I think one of the important things to raise there is that at the end of the day, as Councillor Horwood said, this is an interim list. things change. We've already said that, and we have to move with those changes. So it needs to be a living infrastructure document. We already know that actually quite a bit of the original infrastructure, if you go back to the JCS one where it was so heavily loaded with county highway stuff, there is stuff that has already dropped off of that because that's clearly fallen to the county and is work in progress that they are contributing or they are paying for financially. I think that one of the things I'd respond to Councillor Baker on is that actually, yes, we have been innovative in terms of our SIL and our strategic planning, which is why we've got some support from the Planning Advisory in the way that we're approaching this. And it's only going to work to the benefit of all of our residents across all of the districts is if we work together. And sometimes we have to go, I don't really want to do that, but yes, it's the right thing to do. You know, I mean, and that's what negotiation is about, isn't it? Some you win, some you lose, and some you meet in the middle. And that's the way that I think we've been working very successfully. And, you know, we've got to this point where actually this authority, if you like, was a Liberal Democrat administration, so not against, but working with two Conservative administrations, one of which who was fully engaged, the other that wasn't. But we've now got a change of administration in Tewkesbury, and you know we're working really well with them, and it's much easier. But then equally, we work really well with Richard Cook because he's realistic like I am of what the expectations of what we can achieve together. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. I think with that we'll move to the vote. So. Okay, members, that is carried unanimously. We are now over the 2-hour mark, so we'll take a short break at this point. I just want to say, I know at this meeting in the year, it's traditional to invite members up to the parlour. Given the length of the agenda, and it was agreed with other group leaders rather than me just being a Scrooge, but it was suggested that we perhaps don't want to do that today. But there should hopefully be some mince pies out in the foyer for everyone. So we'll see you out there. If we say 15 minutes, so if we meet at 5:05, please, back in the chamber. Thank you, members. Right, thank you, members. Okay, so moving on with the agenda, we're on to item 15 now, and that's the adoption of Cheltenham's Animal Welfare Charter. So for this one, it's to the Cabinet Member for Customer and Regulatory Services. Sorry, it's Councillor Horwood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is a document that updates actually a rather old policy of this council, which was way, way ahead of its time in the 1980s when we first adopted an animal welfare charter. And since then, a number of issues have bubbled up in the public consciousness. There have been campaigns to ban wild animals in circuses. There have been campaigns to ban pets as prizes. There have been campaigns to ban hunting on Cheltenham Borough Council land. And those are amongst the most high profile of these. But actually, when we checked this age-old, I was around in the 1980s, not that old, this relatively recent document, we discovered that actually it was already Cheltenham Borough Council policy to have many of these enlightened policies, and we've been able to give positive replies to people. But it clearly highlighted that this document was pretty aged, and showing its grey hairs like some of us. So this is the updated version, which takes account of later thinking about important concepts like sentience and recognising the concept of animal rights, in a sense, that animals do have the right to be treated with humanity and with care. Now, it covers a very wide range of things, and I think given the length of the agenda, I'm not going to go to the entire charter, but happy to answer questions on specific parts. But there are some that are quite relevant to particular council operations. There's one in particular I just want to highlight that I'm indebted to Councillor Cook, I think, for pointing out there's a slight glitch in the wording of the report. So at para 2.13, before anyone else raises it, it says the authority will not support the killing of animals unless they present a risk to human health and safety. That sounds a bit absolute, and it is a lot more absolute than is actually in the charter itself, because actually it's in the charter in the context only of pest control. And the point of it is that we will support the killing of animals as required by law, actually, in some cases, where there are pest infestations, and otherwise only where it represents harm to human health and safety. So, for instance, if there is cosmetic damage being done to your lawn by wildlife, Cheltenham Pest Control will not go in and start exterminating parts of the local ecology in order to protect the look of someone's lawn. That's the context for that. So I'm told that we don't actually propose a formal amendment to this wording, but I'm going to suggest that that wording is read as the authority will not support the killing of animals in council operations unless they present a risk to human health and safety, or in council operations such as pest control. And that will then, the minutes will now be amended to reflect that in this report. There are other areas which are bluntly outside our control, but where as a responsible local authority we should be encouraging good practice. Sometimes this is amongst residents in terms of things like tethering horses and general sort of humanity towards animals. But in other cases, it's trying to encourage or putting on record our request to government to improve things. We've recently had Diwali and Guy Fawkes Night, when quite a lot of communities love setting off fireworks, some of which these days sound like sort of major artillery shells going off and cause real distress and upset to pets and their owners, and indeed to wild animals. And so we have already passed a council motion in this chamber which asked for a lower decibel limit from government, and for more steps to control noisy fireworks while allowing people to enjoy, bright and colourful fireworks if they want. And so that is reflected in this policy as well. So there is quite a lot of material in this animal welfare charter, but I do think it is really important. Animals don't have votes. They are not This is not an issue that will ever rank up against the NHS or the cost of living crisis on the public political agenda, but it is really important, and it says something about us as a civilised society and a civilised town, that we make a priority of animal welfare and that we put on record our commitment to respect it, both in our own council operations and in the wider context as well. So in that respect, I commend this report to, and the Charter itself, to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Seacombe.
Thank you very much. You talked about not changing words, Councillor Horwood. I'd like you to add one word to make sense of the sentence 2 sections before the one you've been referring to. 2.11, the authority has given a commitment to do whatever it reasonably can to rehome stray dogs. There is veterinary advice to the contrary. It needs something like if or unless or whatever, but that needs correcting.
It certainly does, and it will be done.
Councillor Baker.
It's clear to me that this is a far more radical document than government policy, and there's a lot of situations here where we would want to do a lot more if we could. Can I just ask a couple of questions, Martin? Regarding hunting, and we clearly have banned hunting on council land, although it's supposed to be an illegal activity anyway. But does that ban extend to include things like trail hunts, hunting activities, exercising dogs and cubbing? Because I hope it does include the whole remit of hunt-type activities. And that's not clear from the wording currently. Thank you.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I think the wording in front of us is the wording in front of us, and I think it would be subject to interpretation if somebody challenged something like trail hunting, for instance. Whether technically trail hunting is hunting, since it's not supposed to involve wild animals, and therefore doesn't necessarily involve the welfare of animals, and therefore I would say it might be outside the remit of this policy. Perhaps this is an area where we need more debate and a bit more clarification, perhaps in a future iteration of this policy, because I understand entirely where Councillor Baker is coming from, but perhaps I think the wording at the moment refers to hunting, which is by implication something which is done to a living animal, not to a trail. So it's not quite the same now.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much. I have no objection to this, but I would like to say, and believe me, I do not want to start a big debate because I would like to go to the pub. But I had recently an inquiry from a resident. I know it's a thorny issue, but could I just put on record that we do need to think about seagulls in this town? It's a constant nag. And I was recently requested by a resident via the Conservative office, actually, as to what we were doing. And I had to tell her that the Secretary of State, Mr. Gove, had recently curtailed our attempts at oiling eggs. And I do not wish to hurt seagulls, but I would like to offer them a gentleman's club or a creche where they could go away and have their babies without sitting on my roof at 4 in the morning. Thank you.
Paragraph 21 of the Charter reflects both the law and what we are allowed to do to gulls, but also what I would describe, I think, as, after considerable hours of debate in the past, the more or less settled policy of this council, which I would be quite loath to reopen, not least because I'd quite like to get to the pub eventually as well. So I think this is a reasonable and legal and proportionate policy which reflects actually a lot of the legal constraints we're placed under in dealing with birds. So I hope Councillor Clark will be happy to vote for it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Clucas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quickie, really. Looking quickly through this, there's use of pesticides and herbicides and so on. I just wonder, is that likely to affect the chemicals that are used in the war on wheat?
Well, there was bound to be one question that completely floored me. I'm afraid that is it. I have To be honest, absolutely no idea. I mean, in the use of pesticides and herbicides, this states what is already our policy, which is to reduce the use of pesticides and herbicides in the public realm.
Yeah.
And I have to commend Councillor Dobie for the work he's doing on our trying to get really effective weed control, but with simultaneously encouraging biodiversity and reducing the use of herbicides and pesticides. In respect to the war on wheat, I honestly have no idea. I will ask officers to write to Councillor Clucas and give us an answer on that.
Okay, that was the last of the questions. Do we have... Oh, sorry, Councillor Wheeler.
Sorry, just very quickly, Martin. Yes, it gets me very frustrated in the spring when my beautiful banana trees get eaten from the bottoms of the leaves by the squirrels. They're annoying. But I wouldn't, I'm with you. But on the other side of things, I think one of the biggest problems we have with squirrels, rats, pigeons, seagulls, is not, it's our fault in many cases, because there was the lady that used to buy several loaves of bread and sprinkle them along the strand, and other people that don't throw their rubbish away. Have we got anything in there that gives us sort of extra powers to stop people either deliberately or through laziness feeding those animals?
I'm looking swiftly. There is section 26 of the policy refers to litter, which broadly covers what he's talking about, which points out that litter can cause harm to both domestic and wild animals. And it, again, reinforces other policy we already have, that litter is disposed of safely in waste facilities provided throughout the borough, and that we will strictly enforce littering offences, which you may know have the fines for litter, as well as graffiti and other forms of antisocial behaviour, have recently been increased. So I think the broad answer is yes.
Okay, councillors, we'll move on to the debate. Do we have any members wishing to speak? Councillor Telford.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm glad that the councillors are looking to adopt this proposed animal charter. It's noticeable to me that when I walk my dog or talk to residents on the doors that we're a very animal-friendly town. People always stop to see your dogs, people's dogs, cats, whatever, are always coming to the doors to say hi as well. And I'm sure many residents will agree that animals need to be protected from harm. So I'd like to draw attention to point 4 of the Charter regarding animals as prizes. What feels like an increasingly long time ago, when I was at university, I worked at a pet shop, and we put in a lot of time and effort to ensure that animals were sold to a safe home, even going so far as to checking the pH levels of customers' fish tank water. And then it would be incredibly disheartening to hear of a goldfish then being hung in a bag like it's popcorn at a fair to be won and just give, obviously, no longer to anyone under the age of 16, but still, if I was 17 and just given a fish, I'm not necessarily the appropriate person to just be given a bag with a fish in it and just go home with it to chuck it in a bowl. And there was no precautions or protections in place, so I'm glad that this practice is banned on council land entirely, and I welcome the council working with private landowners to discourage this practice across other venues. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to ask a question, but I decided not to, because we've previously talked about hard-to-reach groups when it comes to consultation, and I was going to ask Councillor Hall if he's consulted all the animals to make sure they responded. That being said, Councillor Telford pitched a phrase I was going to use, which is animal-friendly, and I think this is such an encompassing charter, which I think is really, really welcomed. We are an animal-friendly town, and I just want to put on a general point that we welcome this sort of policy. So, Councillor Hall, thanks for all your hard work. I know you've been at pains to try and get this right and be across all the detail from it. I'm presuming we can review it in the future, like we can do with all of our policies, and then add any other further nuances we need to. But thank you, Councillor Hall, for your time on this one.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know what it is, but it's the name Barbara that doesn't like seagulls, because older members remember a Conservative member that had a war on seagulls. Now, It's time for confession. I feed the birds outside my house every day. I will now in future put up a sign, no seagulls, just to appease Barbara. But when Councillor Horwood talked about moles, when I worked for the Doughty Group at 25 site, we had a very nice formal lawn and flower beds, and we had moles in it. And the gardener tried all things. He tried the exhaust of the diesel van down there on some flexi tube. He set traps, and I gave him the best advice I could give him. If you catch it, bury the damn thing alive.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Do we have any other members looking to speak? And if not, we'll go back to Councillor Horwood to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't speak for long, except to say yes to Councillor Jeffries, that, of course, like any council policy, this is subject to ongoing review, and I'm sure we can refine it and improve it in future. To Councillor Fisher, I would say, well, it's not exactly council policy to bury anything alive, but I'm not sure that would work with a mole, because they do actually burrow underground. And as far as putting out feed for seagulls, I can recommend the RSPB Vinehouse range of bird feeders, which are not very accessible to seagulls, so I would suggest that he uses those in future. But I welcome the support for this charter from members across the chamber, and again, commend this to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horwood. We'll go to the vote. Okay, thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 16 then. So this is the annual carbon footprint report for 22-23, and we'll move, and this will be from the Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to all colleagues and friends this afternoon. It is a privilege once again to be your Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency and to be bringing you this year's update on our carbon footprint. As is traditional, I have written a speech that takes just about as long as it takes to read this report. So in the next minute or so, I'm going to tell you when your time starts. If you haven't read the report, now is the time. So, ready, set, go. So let's start with the really important figure that I think this report really does base itself on. That 15% net reduction figure. It's 15.01 to be completely exact, but I think there's a really important thing to note about this. When we started off this whole programme, we thought to ourselves, how are we going to get to net zero by 2030? We sort of charted that ever-reducing number that we needed to get to reach that zero figure, and we needed to reduce our carbon footprint by 14% per year. This puts us ever so slightly ahead of schedule, which is a nice thing to be in local government, possibly even a rarity. So as I reach this point in my life and I veer aimlessly towards retirement, I do worry more and more about what kind of world we're going to be giving to our children and to our grandchildren. And I think here at Cheltenham and in this council, we will have a really compelling story that we can share with those people. When we talk to our children and our grandchildren, I think we can be really proud of the progress that we've made this year. I'm particularly proud of leading a climate team here at Cheltenham that completely rejects sort of hair, shirt and super glue climate politics. We have invested tirelessly in our communities, be that through mutual aid programmes supporting teams like Planet Cheltenham and the Cheltenham Zero project, which I think has come a long way this year. In particular, thanks to Becky Sillins for her work on this, because she does really serve as the heart and soul of that fantastic community work. I'm also really proud of the financial and mentorship support we'll be providing to small and medium businesses across Cheltenham in the new year, and the retrofit funding that we've released to community organisations, from churches all the way through to scout huts, because we know, as councillors and as residents of this town, that these spaces are a vital social infrastructure. Without them, our town would not be what it is, and I think it's so important in this cost of living crisis, where the fuel bills are sky high, that we are able to help them with retrofitting and with investments in improving their businesses. I'm also really proud, I have to say, of the new solar panels at Cheltenham Town Football Club, which I have to say look quite exciting. I'm a big fan, and it is the first really major Cheltenham Green Deal part-funded project. I remember when I took on this project from the very much here, Councillor Max Wilkinson. Here we had a very exciting and incredibly visionary idea that many local authorities are very jealous of. I know because I've spoken to them about it. And I think it's been a really exciting year for getting that programme up and running. Very few projects, I think, within the Cheltenham Borough Council spectrum really emphasise our commitment to tackling the climate crisis alongside financial responsibility and sustainability. This project really does show that we can invest in the things that people in Cheltenham love to ensure that they will last as long as they love them. One of the most common questions that I get asked when I do public engagement events, trips to schools, when I'm on the doorstep, sometimes when I'm in the chip shop, just to fully get the full spectrum of times I get asked this question, is do I think we can hit our net zero by 2030 target? And here's what I think. Not only do I think it's possible, but I think this year has been a really exciting year for demonstrating how we'll get there. And it's not just me who thinks that. So we've made substantial progress over the last year against the Carbon Disclosure Practice Scorecard, which is a global gold standard recognised policy paper that is designed for benchmarking different cities across the world on their progress against our core targets. We have gone from a grade D up to a grade B on the things that really matter, like adaptation and mitigation. There's only one thing we need to get over to the A line on one of those issues, and that is the county-wide vulnerability assessment, which is currently out for competitive tender. So next year we should be able to tick that box off, and we will, without a doubt, be both above global average and above our regional average, which I think is so, so important and really exciting for a town like Cheltenham to be leading the way. Thank you in particular to my office team and Maisie in particular, who has done incredible work to make this report possible. And thanks to a whole range of teams across CBC, because this project has very much been a collaborative effort. Thanks in particular to Paul Jones for his support and belief in the Green Deal, and to Claire Hughes for all the advice and support that she's offered as we've handled some more challenging public engagement matters. Above all, thank you to our staff across the organisation, be that from Ubico all the way through to staff working in this building, for everything they have done to change the way they work and live in order to help make this 15% reduction possible. I'm incredibly grateful to you all. So thank you, colleagues and friends. I commend this report to you and all the extensive work that my officers have done to make it happen. Happy to answer any questions.
Right, councillors, do we have any questions? No, sorry, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you, Mr. It's just an idea. I think last year when we had this same report, and thank you for the report, by the way, it's good to see there's some progress. I think I did suggest, have we thought about developing a performance indicator that might be able to go to overview and scrutiny to see, you could monitor, you know, as we do other things. It might be tricky, but I would think it could be done, and it might be worth checking that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harman. I know that we make an annual visit to overview and scrutiny. It's one of the great highlights of my calendar as a Cabinet member. And I do feel that the report we gave was fairly good at benchmarking against some of the previous things that have been brought up the year before and things that have come up in the debate when this came to full council. If you do have any ideas for how you'd like it to be benchmarked, I'm always happy to hear from you, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, we'll move... Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, within this report, we're reporting on the buildings that are run on our behalf by the Cheltenham Trust, and the work of the Cheltenham Trust is really important. It falls within my cabinet portfolio, the relationship between the council and the trust, that is. And clearly, the trustees, the management and the junior staff on the trust have a huge role to play in helping us to reach our net zero target. So I was just wondering what Councillor Lewis thought was going on there, and whether we were making the progress that we needed to as quickly as we needed to on those buildings like the pump room, the town hall, leisure act, etc.
thank you to the Cabinet Member, who is, of course, responsible for the Cheltenham Trust. I think this year's report has been better in that regard because we have far more accurate figures. We know last year one of the big issues we had with this report was we didn't quite have the numbers that we needed from the Cheltenham Trust. We now have a far more accurate picture of what's going on in their different sites, and that, I think, is the very exciting starting point for how we work with them on that reduction. It's not that we haven't been working with them, we're in regular conversation with them, we've done audits on their sites, we know them well enough and work very closely with them, but I think there are some real opportunities now that we have that very clear picture of what this kind of progress needs to look like to make it next year's great big mission alongside Cheltenham Borough Homes.
Okay, councillors, we'll move to debate on this item. Do we have any councillors wishing to speak? No? In that case, Councillor Hay.
Could I just place on record, I know when Councillor Lewis took on this portfolio, it was really the start of our journey that Councillor Wilkinson had started. And as members will remember, we didn't have a whole heap of money to put towards this, but we made it one of our priorities in the budget. And this last year has been a real, absolutely driven left, right and centre by Councillor Lewis. And I'd like to place on record my personal thanks to her as the Cabinet Member who has driven that. And because, we haven't had necessarily the officers to support that, but she still kept driving it with what she was given. And now she's got an amazing team, so she can take more of a back seat. She doesn't, although I doubt it somehow. But I did want to just say a special thank you to her.
With that, did you want to respond, Councillor Lewis?
I would just like to put on record my thanks to the leader for putting me in this role and all the support that she has given in making this possible. I have to say, there have been many days where things have looked rough, and I've been able to talk to, quite frankly, one of my best friends on this council. She's been a real rock at some really tough times in moving this progress forward, so I would like to thank her in return, which all feels very lovely.
And with that, we'll go to the vote. Thank you, councillors. That is carried unanimously. Okay, item 17 then. This is the annual report of Overview and Scrutiny. And so with that, we'll hand over to the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny to introduce the report. Councillor Joy.
Cool. So thank you so much to everyone. It's really been an exciting couple of months for me. So I didn't actually start out this year as Chair of Overview and Scrutiny. I've been trying to meet the expectation of Chair that was set by Councillor John Payne, who resigned earlier this year, but is very deeply missed. I'm really, really proud of the progress that we've made within the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We've, as you can see from the report, there's a wide variety of different things that we've been examining, and even though our work is never done, it's really, really good to have the opportunity to have a look at everything that's going on and just make sure that we're staying on top of it. Some of you may be aware of the call-in that took place this year, which is pretty much the first one that we've had in a few years now. So I'm really proud of everyone who adjusted really well to that and just made sure that we had the right kind of productive discussion, and a task group has come out of that as well. So we're kind of hoping to replicate the really great work done by the Multiple Deprivations Indices group that met through the last year. Just kind of want to make sure that we can include people. Again, it's really reassuring to hear people speaking favourably about public consultations, so that's very much one of our priorities for that. Just the fact that we've been able to see some really great material benefits coming out of that, being able to have a look at the progress of the Minster Exchange, having discussions with Publica through their challenging situations at the moment has been really, really welcome as well. Just making sure that we can kind of feed in ideas about the culture strategy, our tourism and accessibility options as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we achieve in the next year as well, or in the next few months. We've had a member request from Councillor Took to have a look into accessibility and probably potentially have a scrutiny task group dedicated to that. So I'm really looking forward to having more of an examination of that. I think that's pretty much everything I had in mind. I did really want to say thank you so much for Democratic Services, because they've massively helped me to adjust to this role, which kind of came slightly out of nowhere for me. Getting training from a member of the Institute for Democratic Services as well was really invaluable to me, and just having the right kind of training to meet the requirements of this role has been fantastic. So if anyone has any feedback or have any questions, then I'd be really welcome. I'd welcome them very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Joy. Do we have any questions on this item? No. We'll move to debate then. Do we have any members wishing to speak? Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to put on record my thanks to a number of people who have done so much with this and who are no longer at the council. I'll start with John Payne, who, as chair, did a huge amount and was a very great partner in the work that we did on the tackling multiple deprivation. I also want to thank Darren Knight, who has got a promotion and moved to a different authority, and I think that was well deserved based on what we saw, the work that he delivered towards this. But I also want to thank Harry Mayo, who created the report and again has gone on to a different authority. And one thank you to someone who still is with the authority, which is Richard Gibson and his team, because they have effectively been tasked with the delivery and the monitoring of this, and they do a fantastic job, and I really want to put my thanks to them on record. It's so important that we took the time to look at our town and where there were pockets of deprivation, and to hear from people in the frontline services dealing with that, so that we could look at what we can do, but also the partners we could work with. And that is just an important part of scrutiny outside of Cabinet. And I want to thank everyone who contributed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Willingham. I'm sure many councillors will second what has just been said. Councillor Hay.
I just wanted to say thank you very much to Councillor Joy for stepping into the breach, and I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying it.
Okay, do we have any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks. I was on ONS quite a few years ago, and it definitely wasn't as structured as it is today. I think Councillor Mason started some of that work going back a few years, taken on by John Payne, and now Councillor Joy is in the hot seat. And what I think we all should be really mindful of is that it's best practice to have opposition members in scrutiny. We absolutely can't be scrutinising the work of the administration, whether the Liberal Democrats doing it, and I'm sure the Conservatives would agree the same if it was them in charge of the Green Group as well, such as it is today with only Councillor Joy there on her own as the chairman of scrutiny, which kind of proves the point, doesn't it? Because having people who are from the opposition scrutinising is always going to be much more powerful than having someone from the administration side. And I think all councils need to work on that basis, because it is a best practice in the LGA, and any that aren't need to review their policies and their processes accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. I don't have any other members indicating to speak, so I'll go back to Councillor Joy just to sum up.
So thank you so much for that, and thank you, Councillor Willingham. I really appreciate you making mention of them specifically, of Harry and of Richard and of Darren as well. You know, they are very much missed. I'm just still feeling slightly anxious about sort of taking point on these things. So, you know, thank you so much for making up for my mistake on that. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's everything I had. But I'm really looking forward to working with everyone in time to come. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Joy, and it's no mistake at all. Right, members, should we go to the vote? Okay, thank you, members, and that is also carried unanimously. Moving on now, item 18. This is revisions to the Constitution. And for this, we'll hand over to Councillor Hay for report from the leader.
Thank you, Mayor. So, not last but not least, because actually our Constitution is an important part of our governance and is a document that needs constantly updating on our policies and procedures. So, I'm delighted to bring forward to Council the next phase of this ongoing review of the Council's Constitution and thank the Constitution Working Group for putting forward their recommendations. In this paper, members will see suggested updates to the summary and explanation of the Constitution. The financial rules and the limits, the appendices, both the Planning Code of Conduct and probity and licensing documents, and the introduction of a Budget Council meeting protocol, which is a new one for us. Over the years, many members have commented on how complicated the Constitution can be to digest. So it's great to see sections being transferred into the accessibility compliant format and the review of appendices, which have a significant impact on the size of the document. I do not intend to go through every suggested amendment. However, just to highlight the following points. The budget protocol reflects the practice that has been followed by this council at the budget setting meeting for many years. But by documenting the process, we are being open and transparent to the public, and it means that councillors are aware of how the meeting will operate sufficiently in advance. It also means there will be no longer any need to suspend standing orders. Both the Planning Code of Conduct and the probity and licensing documents have been reviewed and approved by those respective committees before coming forward to Council. So it is important that these, which sit alongside our Code of Conduct, are kept up to date and that members abide by them. The main changes to the financial rules reflect the return of finance services from Publica back in-house to Cheltenham. Some minor changes to thresholds identified in the documents reflect the current economic position and facilitate the principles of good decision-making, i.e. there was a time, for many, many years, officers had no ability to be able to spend more than £10,000, which even 10 years ago wasn't very realistic because you could barely replace a garage door or build, you know, there was a lot that just failed to have to come back to members for decision, and actually we've got highly qualified, experienced officers that shouldn't need to come back to us to ask can they spend more than £10,000. So the review of appendices and a move towards using more links to the website means that we can ensure that information remains up to date and removes duplication. I, for one, very much appreciate the work of Claire Hughes in bringing our Constitution together as a much, much easier document to navigate around. More things in one easy to find place rather than flipping between sections. My thanks also go to the working group for their time in reviewing the suggested changes. It's a world of difference between before I think my husband is a bit of a Constitution. He likes the Constitution, and I remember him walking around with a book yay thick. Well, when I say a book, a folder, and it's so. I would always go to him once I became a councillor and go, where do I look for this? Because it was so mammoth, and you couldn't. You'd find one section, and then you'd have to cross-reference it to another, which is not at all user-friendly. So I'm happy to take any questions, Mayor. Although it's been a long meeting, and I guess there probably won't be any.
I'm sure, given the item, there will be plenty of questions. Do we have Councillor Willingham?
So I have one question, which is about the rights of the public, and I don't think it's been addressed, but there is quite a lot of paperwork, and I might have missed it. So we previously changed the public question regime so that questions had to be submitted effectively before the agenda of the meeting was published. This means that no member of the public can submit a written question on something that's on the agenda, which does seem a bit of an oversight. So if someone's asking a question about something that's not on the agenda, they obviously need to get that in good time. But it does seem to me that there is a bit of an issue where something's on the agenda and a member of the public can't ask a written question because they have to get the question in before it's been published. Has that been corrected? And if not, can Constitution Group take that away and look at finding a way so that people can ask questions about things that are on the agenda rather than having to have premonition of what will be on the agenda, which makes it rather impossible to ask questions?
Sorry, Councillor Willingham, there was something in my head that I knew that had been, because that's been raised before, and I know and the Constitution Working Group did look at that. The difference between the public as well, and I think the Constitution Working Group decided not to change that, but what was said is that, of course, you can ask a question through your ward councillor as well. That's how the working group put forward the recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Harman.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was actually going to agree with Councillor Willingham. Be pleased to know that I do that sometimes, David. Because actually there is a practical thing there. I think we managed to get it that way around for the budget meeting and for the Cheltenham Borough Homes issue. Now, obviously the questions that come often not related to the agenda, but they may be. And I think I'm right in saying, you can say it's your ward member, but I think the members' questions close at the same time as the public questions. So you'd only be left with raising it in debate. We can't decide it tonight, but I just wonder if we could take it back and have another look and perhaps see what happens in other councils.
Councillor Harman, you sit on the Constitution Working Group, so maybe you'd like to raise that and we can take that back and have a look at it. Or you can. I know Councillor Nelson substituted for you, but I'm sure that the members of the working group will have heard that. I'm an observer on that, so I can't ask them. I can request that it goes on the agenda.
Okay, do we have any other questions on this item? No, so we'll move to debate. Do we have anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Baker.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the planning protocol, which is a very welcome update of current protocols, and I congratulate Claire and everybody involved in putting this document together. It's a really, really good read and provides absolute clarity as to the role of members of the planning committee and officers as well. I would ask actually that this document is circulated as the separate document to all members of the planning committee as a matter of course. And it may be something that we may want some training on in going forward, but I'm not so sure about that. We should. It's a very good document, it's easy to read, and we should be able to understand our responsibilities. What's interesting, there are a number of changes in the document, and which is another reason for circulating it and for people to read it. One of which actually is to allow speakers, members of the public, who currently only have up to 3 minutes to speak, whereas ward councillors have up to 5 minutes to speak. So going forward, members of the public will be able to speak to up to 5 minutes, and I think that's a really positive way forward. There were a number of other changes, particularly documenting training and the training regime going forward, because frankly it's been hit and miss, mainly miss, in the last 3 or 4 years, mainly because of the complete changeover of head of planning, interim and so on. So we will have much more structured training going forward with a minimum of 3 courses, and members will have to attend at least 2 of those. And I think it's really important. I think somebody mentioned earlier all the documents we have to refer to, licensing and planning, all the plans, and I think the more training we can have, the better. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like Councillor Hayes-Vetter-Half, I too read the Constitution back to front when it was a massive book. In fact, one of the first things I did when I got elected in 2010. And whilst I'm very liberal, I don't think it should be compulsory view. I do recommend to all new councillors, any councillors, to delve into the Constitution, because it's our rule book. It's how we operate. It's what governs this town and how we operate in this town. I think it's a very important document we hold. It's a living, breathing document, which is why there's so many changes. So I'm sure it will change again in the future for the better, but thank you. I'm happy to support this. I think it's a very important document.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to sort of mirror the comments on planning, but to refer to on the planning bit, but to refer to the licensing probity guidance. I think the important thing for members to take away on this is the changes to the lobbying rules. We do have a number of contentious applications that come before the licensing committee, and I know they exercise a number of members. I would urge anyone who has their concerns about licensing applications to read the guidance on lobbying very, very clearly, just to make sure that they are complying with the probity guidance. The ways to raise one's concerns are very clearly documented in there, and the process is usually very, very detailed in statute, i.e. timescales, etc. So please, if you are concerned about some applications, make sure you read those and comply with them. It makes everybody's life easier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Willingham. We have no other members indicating to speak, so we'll go back to Councillor Hay to sum up, please.
Actually, in 2 words to sum up, really. I don't have a sum up, but actually I'm going to take this opportunity to say to all councillors, as I as leader I'm sure would, I'd like us to convey our thanks to all of our officers this year and to wish them all a very happy Christmas.
Okay, I'm sure we all second that. Let me, we just now move to the vote, please. Thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. Item 19 is notices of motion. We have none received. And item 20, just to conclude the meeting, any other item the Mayor determines as urgent and which requires a decision, there is none, other than for me to, very remiss of me to not thank Democratic Services and particularly Claire Morris for sorting out all the mince pies in the break earlier on, so thank you very much to them. And again, as Councillor Hay has just said, as this is the last meeting of the year, I just want to thank all members for all your contributions through the year, and all officers for all your efforts throughout the year. So thank you very much. And very finally, I wish those of you who are going on to a Christmas party tonight a very pleasant evening. There we go. Oh dear. Thank you all.